What would you do if the woman who humiliated you in the morning was the same woman begging for your help by afternoon? Ryan Bennett watched his only truck get towed because of one careless woman's snap judgment. He said nothing, paid the fine, went home to his 7-year-old daughter. But the universe has a funny way of settling accounts. By sundown, that same woman, the billionaire, the untouchable, would be standing in his garage, desperate, humbled, and completely at his mercy. Drop a comment with your city. Let's see how far this story travels. The engine knocked. It always knocked on cold mornings. A low, rhythmic complaint from somewhere deep inside the block, like an old man grumbling about his knees before climbing out of bed. Ryan Bennett had learned to read that sound the way other people read weather. One knock meant the truck needed a minute. 2 knocks close together meant check the oil. 3 in a row meant pull over and call someone smarter than yourself. This morning, it was 1 knock. Ryan let the engine idle in the driveway for 90 seconds, counting silently, while he balanced a travel mug of lukewarm coffee on his knee and reviewed the delivery manifest on a crumpled sheet of paper. 3 stops. Replacement circuit board to a restaurant on 5th, compressor parts to a machine shop in the warehouse district. And 1 more, a sealed parts package to a service contractor working somewhere in the Meridian Tower complex downtown. Meridian Tower. He'd driven past it 100 times but never been inside. Glass and steel and ambition stacked 42 stories above the street. The kind of building that had its own zip code energy, where the revolving doors spun faster, where everyone walked like they were late to something important, where the parking signs cost more to ignore than Ryan made in a day. He checked the rear-view mirror. Lily was still asleep. She'd fallen asleep in the back seat somewhere between her bedroom and the truck, which happened more often than Ryan liked to admit. She was 7 years old and weighed approximately nothing, and on mornings when the school bus schedule didn't line up with his first delivery, he'd wrap her in her blanket, carry her down the porch steps, buckle her into the back seat still unconscious, and promise himself he'd figure out a better system eventually. He never figured out a better system. Lily's teacher, Mrs. Okafor, had stopped commenting on the fact that Lily sometimes arrived at school with a comb track only on one side of her head. She understood, in the way that teachers who've seen everything understand, that Ryan Bennett was doing the math differently than most parents. Fewer variables, thinner margins, the same love stretched across twice the distance. "You awake back there?" he asked. A small sound. Not quite yes. "First stop's the restaurant. You can stay in the truck." Another sound. Closer to yes. He pulled out of the driveway and pointed the truck toward the city. The restaurant stop was fast. Ryan had the circuit board boxed and labeled and signed for in under 4 minutes. The manager, a short man named Gerald who smelled perpetually of oregano and mild panic, shook his hand with the fervor of someone who'd been without a functional POS system for 18 hours and was not about to forget who saved him. "You are a miracle," Gerald said. "It's a circuit board," Ryan said. "To me, right now, it's a miracle." Ryan didn't argue. He took his copy of the receipt, rolled it into his shirt pocket, and went back to the truck. Lily had graduated from unconscious to semi-conscious, which meant she was sitting upright with her eyes half open, her blanket wrapped around her like a cape, staring at the restaurant entrance with the focused expression of someone who had recently become aware that the world existed. "Did he say miracle?" she asked. He was being dramatic. "Oh." She blinked. "What's a circuit board?" "It's what makes the cash register work." "Oh." Another blink. "Can I have a muffin? After school?" "That's not now." "No," Ryan agreed. "It is not now." The machine shop stop took longer. The guy behind the counter, a heavy-set man named Terrence, who wore the same gray shirt every time Ryan had ever seen him, or possibly owned 7 identical gray shirts, wanted to talk about the compressor. Not the parts Ryan had delivered, but the compressor Terrence had theoretically been planning to rebuild for 6 months. The conversation had the comfortable, familiar shape of a conversation Ryan recognized as one that would go nowhere productive, and he participated in it with genuine interest anyway, because that was who he was. He wasn't in a rush. Not yet. When he finally got back to the truck, Lily, now fully awake, eating a granola bar she'd apparently materialized from the seat pocket. It was 8:10. He had 40 minutes before school drop-off. The Meridian Tower delivery was downtown, maybe 12 minutes away. It was fine. It was all fine. He told himself it was all fine. Meridian Tower announced itself from 6 blocks away. Ryan had grown up in this city, had watched the building go up steel beam by steel beam. During the years he worked in finance, had stood in offices on the 28th and 31st floors of other towers and looked at its architecture with professional admiration. He had not stood in those offices in a long time. That was a different Ryan Bennett. Same face mostly, different life. He pulled onto the block and immediately understood that the loading area at the back of the building, where he'd been told the service entrance was completely blocked. A catering truck, a furniture delivery vehicle, and a water delivery service had formed a polite but immovable triangle of obstruction that showed no signs of resolving before he needed to drop Lily at school. He circled the block. The loading area was still blocked. He circled again. Still blocked. The furniture guys were now arguing about something near the elevator bay. The water delivery man was on his phone. No one was moving with any urgency. Ryan pulled back around to the front of the building and looked at the street. The main entrance had a parking lane, mostly reserved signage, but there was a gap near the service door on the side, under an overhang, where a maintenance vehicle had clearly parked recently. The yellow curb paint was worn down to almost nothing. A cone sat at one end, but not the other. He looked at the manifest. Service contractor. Side entrance. He looked at the gap. He looked at his watch. "I'll be 5 minutes," he told Lily. "Okay." "Stay in the truck." "Dad, I always stay in the truck." "I know. I just say it every time." "I know," she said. "It's kind of your thing." He grabbed the sealed parts box from the cargo bed, locked the truck, and jogged toward the side entrance. Vanessa Sterling had been awake since 4:37. She knew the exact time because she'd looked at her phone the moment her eyes opened, a reflex so deeply ingrained it happened before full consciousness arrived. And the number had lodged in her memory with the specific irritation of something that couldn't be undone. 4:37. 40 minutes before her alarm. Over an hour before anyone else on her team would be functional. She'd used the time the way she always used early morning quiet, reading, flagging emails, reviewing the acquisition brief she'd been living inside for the past 6 weeks. The Caldwell-Harmon deal, $3.4 billion. The kind of transaction that took years of relationship building, months of structural negotiation, and weeks of legal architecture to arrive at the edge of completion. They were at the edge now. The signing ceremony was scheduled for 11 o'clock. Vanessa had coordinated the detail of that ceremony down to the placement of the water glasses on the conference table, because that was how she worked. She was 30 years old and had built her company from a boutique data analytics firm into a diversified financial technology corporation with operations across 9 countries. She had not done that by leaving things to chance. She did not enjoy leaving things to chance. What she enjoyed was control, order, the satisfaction of a plan executing exactly as designed. What she had this morning, instead, was a view from the 42nd floor that should have felt triumphant, but mostly just felt like altitude. Her assistant, Marco, knocked at 7:58 and entered with the particular expression he reserved for mornings that were already complicated. Marco was 26 years old and had the organizational instincts of someone twice his age, which made him invaluable. He also had the ability to communicate bad news through posture alone, which was a talent Vanessa had come to both appreciate and dread. "Good morning," he said. His posture said, "It is technically morning." "What?" she said. Not a question. "The Fortuna Group's lead attorney is requesting a pre-meeting call at 9. They want to walk through the representation warranties section one more time. We walked through that section on Thursday. They want to walk through it again." Vanessa set down her coffee. "Why?" He didn't say why. Then call him back and ask why. "I did. He said it was a precaution." She looked at Marco for a moment. Then she turned to the window. 42 floors below, the morning moved with its usual indifference. Taxis and pedestrians, and the slow river of commerce that didn't care about her deal or her timeline or the tightness that had settled into her shoulders somewhere around 11 p.m. yesterday and had not left. "Fine," she said. "Set it up. 9 o'clock. Marco nodded and turned to leave. Marco. He stopped. The side entrance overhang. Is there a vehicle parked there? He crossed to the window and looked down. Looks like a pickup truck. Is it authorized? A pause. It's not in our reserved bay. It's kind of in the service lane adjacent. That's an executive access zone. Technically, the signage, have it towed. He hesitated for just a moment, the fraction of a second of reluctance that he usually controlled better. Do you want me to check if they're making a delivery? There's been some congestion at the loading. Marco. Her voice had the quality of a door closing quietly but completely. Have it towed. I have 40 people arriving in this building in the next 2 hours for the most important transaction this company has ever executed. And I don't need a beat-up truck sitting under my entrance because someone decided the signs didn't apply to them. Marco nodded once. He left. Vanessa turned back to her brief. The delivery had taken less than 4 minutes. The service contractor, a compact, efficient woman named Patricia, who worked for the building's HVAC maintenance company, had been waiting at the side entrance with the kind of focused attention that suggested she had been there for some time. She signed Ryan's receipt without pleasantries, which he respected. He'd been in the building for less time than it took the elevator to reach the 12th floor. He came back out through the side door, turned the corner toward the overhang, and stopped. The truck was on a flatbed, not being loaded, already on it. The tow operator, a heavy-set man in a reflective vest, not unkind-looking, just doing a job, had the chains secured and was completing his paperwork. The whole operation had a polished, institutional efficiency to it, like the city had sent professionals. Ryan stood on the sidewalk and looked at the flatbed. He looked at the space where his truck had been. He stood very still. The tow operator noticed him first. That yours? Yeah. Sorry, man. Called in by the building. Executive access zone. Ryan looked up at the overhang. There was a sign. He looked at it carefully. Reserved. Executive access, Meridian Tower Properties. There had been a cone at one end. He'd looked at the curb paint. He'd made a judgment call. He had made the wrong judgment call. Is there a grace period? He asked. Not angry, just asking. Already called in. I got the dispatch order. I got to complete the pull. What's the impound? The tow operator named a figure that was not catastrophic but was not nothing. Not for Ryan's current bank account, which was operating in the territory of careful decisions and delayed non-essentials. And the lot address? The man handed him a card. Ryan took it, looked at it, folded it precisely, and put it in his shirt pocket next to the delivery receipt. Okay, he said. The tow operator looked at him for a moment, perhaps expecting argument, perhaps expecting the usual escalation that accompanied this situation, and seemed vaguely unsettled by the absence of it. There's a bus stop on the corner. The 47 goes out toward... I know where the 47 goes, Ryan said. Not rudely, just a statement of fact. He took his phone out and dialed. It rang 4 times before she picked up. Dad? Lily's voice was calm, which meant she'd processed the situation through the truck window and arrived at patience through temperament rather than ignorance. She was 7 years old and she had her mother's temperament, which meant she was better at waiting than most adults Ryan knew. Hey, bud. Small problem with the truck. I saw. A pause. The guy with the chains was pretty fast. Yeah. Are you in trouble? No, I just have to take the bus to get you to school. Can you lock the doors? Wait, the truck's gone. He stopped. Are you still in the truck? No, Dad. The truck is on the ramp thing. I got out. A cold spike of something moved through his chest. Where are you? On the sidewalk, by the cone. Don't move. He was already walking. Dad, I'm not going anywhere. I can see the coffee place across the street, and I'm thinking about whether... Lily, stay exactly where you are. I'm literally standing still. He came around the corner and saw her, standing on the sidewalk exactly where she'd said, her school bag over one shoulder, her blanket cape nowhere in evidence. She must have left it on the seat, which was now traveling to an impound lot. Looking at the coffee shop across the street with the serious, evaluative expression she gave to all potential food situations. Something unwound in his chest. He walked up to her and put his hand on her head for a moment. Not a ruffle, just a rest. The kind of touch that was more for him than for her. Hey, she said. Hey. So we're taking the bus? We're taking the bus. Have you ever taken this bus before? Many times. How long is it? Depends on traffic. She looked at the intersection, calculating something. I might be late to school. Maybe a few minutes. Mrs. Okafor writes it down if you're late. I know. It goes in the book. I know it goes in the book, Lily. She looked up at him. Are you sad about the truck? He looked at her. This small, serious person with her mother's eyes and her mother's calm and her father's stubbornness and her own complete originality that belonged to no one but her. I'm fine, he said. Come on. The 47 bus was 12 minutes late, which Lily tracked on Ryan's phone with the same methodical focus she gave to all information she'd decided to take seriously. She sat beside him on the bench with her school bag in her lap and asked questions about the city that passed outside the windows. Why that building had a green roof, whether pigeons slept during the day, what happened to trains when they were tired. Ryan answered all of them. This was not performance. He was not a man who answered children's questions with patient, demonstrative warmth to prove something about himself. He answered because the questions were genuinely interesting, and because Lily's mind moved through the world at an angle that made ordinary things seem newly complicated, and because listening to her think was one of the few things in his current life that felt completely uncomplicated. They arrived at school 9 minutes late. Mrs. Okafor wrote it down in the book. She did not mention it aloud, which Ryan appreciated. Lily gave her father a brief, businesslike hug at the entrance. She was not a child who performed emotion for audiences. And then walked through the double doors without looking back, because looking back was not something she did. Ryan stood outside the school for a moment. Then he called his cousin Marcus, who had a car and a flexible enough Tuesday morning to drive him to the impound lot, complaining only moderately about the interruption to his schedule. The impound lot was in the part of the city where impound lots exist: industrial, functional, indifferent. Ryan paid the fee in cash because his debit card was low enough that the transaction would have triggered a specific kind of anxiety he preferred to avoid before noon. The man behind the window processed his paperwork without ceremony. The truck was returned to him with a scratch on the rear bumper that may or may not have been new. Ryan looked at it for a moment, decided it didn't matter, and drove home. He had lost 4 hours of the morning. He had a repair job at 11 that he was now going to be late for. He had 3 follow-up calls he hadn't made. He had, somewhere in the interior economy of his day, eaten a granola bar that had been his only breakfast and was now approaching the end of its tenure as sufficient fuel. He did not think about Vanessa Sterling because he did not know who Vanessa Sterling was. He had never looked up at the 42nd floor of Meridian Tower and tried to identify the person who had made the call. He just knew that someone had, and that they had not come down to explain themselves, and that this was consistent with how the world worked when you drove an old truck to a building with glass walls and a lot of reserved signs. He went to work. He fixed things. This was what he did. At 11:47 that morning, on the 42nd floor of Meridian Tower, a man named David Chun said 4 words that made the room go very quiet. We need to stop this. David Chun was Vanessa's chief legal officer, a methodical, unsentimental man who had practiced corporate law for 19 years and had the reputation of being someone who read contracts the way others read maps, looking for the place where the road ended. He was not a dramatic person. He did not say dramatic things. The room went quiet. There were 11 people in the pre-signing conference room. Vanessa sat at the head of the table. 2 senior partners from their outside firm occupied the middle section, along with their respective associates. The CFO, the COO, and 2 members of the acquisitions team filled in the rest. On the table were 6 copies of a 412-page acquisition agreement, each flagged with color-coded tabs that represented months of work and several $100,000 in legal fees. The signing was in 73 minutes. What did you find? Vanessa said. Her voice was steady. This was a habit she'd built over a decade. Steadiness of voice as a first response to crisis. Not because she wasn't alarmed, but because alarm was contagious and she refused to be patient zero. Chun turned to page 308. Representation and warranty package, subsection 14D, clause 3, 3rd paragraph. He read it aloud. The room listened. Silence. Read it again, said Patricia Mercer, one of the senior outside partners. Her voice had a careful quality, the carefulness of someone who was not yet sure if they'd missed something obvious. He read it again. More silence. That clause, Mercer said slowly, would allow Fortuna to invoke what amounts to a reversionary interest under the parent holding structure, Chun said. Yes. After the acquisition closes. If they exercised it within 24 months, under specific triggering conditions. What kind of triggering conditions? Vanessa asked. Chun looked at her. That's the problem. The conditions are defined by reference to a performance matrix in Schedule F, which is defined by reference to an index formula in Appendix C, which contains a variable, T sub prime, that is defined nowhere in this document. Vanessa looked at him. It's a ghost variable, he said. It doesn't exist in any publicly available index, which means Fortuna retains the exclusive right to define it. The room processed this. They could define it to trigger whenever they wanted, the CFO said. He was a careful man who spoke rarely and usually accurately. Yes, said Chun, which means after we close and restructure and assume all the integration costs, they could pull back meaningful operational control of up to 31% of the acquired entity's governance structure. Chun closed the document. Without compensation, under the terms we would have signed. Vanessa did not move for 4 seconds. Then she said, How did this get through review? No one answered immediately. The outside counsel partners had the particular expression of people in the process of recalibrating their professional self-concept. Ryan's 11-person assembly of experts, billing a collective $700 an hour across the discovery process, had not caught this. The variable, Mercer said finally. It references Appendix C on page 394, but the reference in the clause uses a slightly different abbreviation. T prime versus T subprime. It reads like a typo, a formatting inconsistency. It reads like a typo, Vanessa repeated. Yes, it is not a typo. No. Vanessa stood up from her chair. She walked to the window. She looked out at the city. The same city that had been 42 floors below her at 6:30 this morning when she'd had Marco make a phone call about a parking issue. She was very quiet. Cancel the 11 o'clock, she said. Marco, who had materialized at some point during the preceding 10 minutes with his tablet and his catastrophe management expression, said, Fortuna's delegation is already in the lobby. Then go explain to them that we've identified an issue requiring review and that we'll reschedule. She turned from the window. Tell them it's routine technical clarification. Don't tell them what we found. Marco looked at her. Go, she said. He went. She turned to Chun. Can we restructure around it? We can draft around it. It'll take time. And we need to know for certain what the clause actually does. Whether this is aggressive drafting or deliberate architecture. Because if it's deliberate, she said. He nodded slowly. Then we need someone who can confirm that with the kind of certainty that holds up. Not just an opinion, proof of structure, evidence that the variable was designed to function this way. How long would that take your team? Chun looked at his associates, back at her. Honestly, days, maybe a week. The mechanism's technical enough that we'd need... We don't have days, she said. We have leverage for exactly as long as they don't know we've found this. It was the acquisitions director, a man named Philip Okafor. No relation to Lily's teacher, though Ryan would have found the coincidence interesting, who said the name. He said it quietly, during a moment when the room had shifted from crisis mode into the particular exhausted silence that follows the realization that no one in the room has the answer. He'd been sitting near the end of the table for the past 20 minutes, saying almost nothing, which was unusual for him. He had the expression of someone chasing a memory. There was a guy, he said. Everyone looked at him. He was in structured finance 8-9 years ago, worked for, I want to say Hartwell Cross, or it was affiliated, some boutique fixed income shop before they folded. He looked at the ceiling, tracking the memory. He had this specific talent, not just contracts, structures, the way instruments were architectured. He could look at something complex and find the place where the logic bent. Vanessa watched him. There was a case, an energy company acquisition, I think it was, or infrastructure. Everyone at the table had signed off, every analyst, every counsel. And this guy read the support documents the night before closing and found a cross-default clause that would have unwound the entire deal under market conditions that were, at the time, considered basically impossible. Philip paused. The conditions occurred 14 months later. The room was quiet. If they hadn't caught it, Philip continued, the company would have been in technical default on $3 billion of obligations because of a market move no one anticipated. What happened to him? Mercer asked. Left finance. I don't know why. Personal reasons, I heard. Some people said he burned out. Some people said he chose to leave. Philip shook his head. He was extraordinary at it, though. I saw his work. The way he annotated documents. It wasn't just legal reading. It was structural thinking, systems thinking. What's his name? Vanessa asked. Philip looked at her. Ryan Bennett, he said. He wasn't home when they first tried. He was at the Carver Street auto repair shop where he'd picked up a part-time contract 3 months ago, not fixing the cars themselves, but the specialty diagnostic equipment that the shop's regular technician had managed to break in 3 separate ways that still impressed Ryan whenever he thought about it. He was lying on his back under a diagnostic bench, rewiring a connection that had shorted sometime last week when his phone rang. Unknown number. He let it ring. Unknown numbers that called without leaving voicemail were usually either spam or something he could deal with later. He dealt with it later. 90 minutes later, he was home, sitting at his kitchen table with a cup of coffee and a turkey sandwich, going through his invoicing for the week, when someone knocked on his front door. Not rang the doorbell. Knocked. People who rang the doorbell were delivery drivers and neighbors. People who knocked specifically, 3 measured strikes, were either from institutions or had something they felt required directness. He opened the door. The woman standing on his porch was expensively dressed in a way that was calibrated to look unstudied. Dark blazer, simple blouse, the kind of shoes that cost more than most people admitted. She was his age or just under, with dark hair pulled back and the precise posture of someone who'd been standing in authority positions since early adulthood. She had, at this particular moment, the expression of someone who had rehearsed this conversation several times and was finding the reality of the doorway to be more difficult than the rehearsal. She looked at him. He looked at her. Ryan Bennett, she said. Not a question. Yeah. A pause in which she seemed to complete some internal negotiation. My name is Vanessa Sterling. I'm the CEO of Sterling Integrated Technologies. I was hoping... She stopped. Do you know who I am? No, he said. Something shifted in her expression. It might have been relief. I run a company. A situation came up today with an acquisition we were planning to close, a legal and structural issue, very technical. I was told you might be someone who could help evaluate it. He looked at her for a moment. Who told you that? Philip Okafor. He said he'd worked near you years ago, at Hartwell Cross. Ryan looked at this information from several angles simultaneously. Philip Okafor. It had been 6 years since he'd thought about anyone from that world. Philip had been a decent man, competent, fair-dealing, the kind of colleague who remembered your coffee order and didn't claim your ideas in meetings. Philip still in acquisitions, he asked. He's my director, yes. Good for him. Ryan was quiet for a moment. What kind of structural issue? Contract clause, acquisition agreement, 400 pages. We think there's a mechanism embedded in it that would allow the opposing party to reclaim governance rights after closing. Think? We're not certain of the mechanism. We need someone who can confirm it and explain it. You have lawyers. I have very good lawyers, she said, and there was something in her voice, not quite bitterness, more like the exhausted candor of someone who'd moved past the version of this statement where it was reassuring. They found the clause. They can't fully map the mechanism. The variable it references doesn't exist in any publicly available index. Ryan looked at her. She looked back at him. He had not yet invited her in. He was still in the doorway, half blocking it, in jeans and a work shirt with a grease smudge on the cuff that he'd noticed earlier and hadn't bothered to address because he'd been inside for the rest of the day. I can pay you, she said. Consulting rate. Whatever you think is appropriate. I don't do consulting anymore. I know, Philip told me. Then, I drove here anyway, she said, because we're out of time and we're out of options, and I was told you were the best person I could find for this. So I drove here. He looked at her for another moment. Then he looked past her, at the street, at the ordinary Tuesday afternoon, at the empty driveway where his truck sat after its expensive morning adventure. He didn't know yet whether this woman had any connection to that adventure. He didn't know her name from anywhere. He just knew she was standing on his porch with the controlled desperation of someone who was not accustomed to needing things from people and was finding it harder than expected. "Give me a minute," he said. He didn't leave her in the doorway. He held the door open and she came in, because whatever else she was someone who'd driven to his house and knocked, and that deserved something. "There's coffee," he said. "It's not great." "That's fine," she said. He looked at the first page of the agreement and felt something shift in the back of his mind. A quality of attention he hadn't used in 6 years, waking up the way muscle memory wakes when you pick up a familiar tool. He was sitting at the kitchen table, not the worn workbench of his garage, though the garage was adjacent and smelled of motor oil and metal, and Vanessa had noted it without comment when he'd briefly led her through it to retrieve his reading glasses from a shelf where they apparently lived among screwdrivers in a small labeled container of bearing grease. "You fix engines?" she'd asked. "Equipment," he said. "Diagnostic systems. Some engines." "You were in structured finance." "I was." "And now you fix equipment." He'd picked up his glasses. "And now I fix equipment." She hadn't said anything else about it. Now she sat across from him at the kitchen table, her own coffee barely touched, watching him read. The agreement was on her laptop, which she'd opened and turned toward him. She had offered to print it, had actually been in the process of suggesting this before catching herself, probably remembering that he had no printer visible and that suggesting she find a print shop was going to cost time neither of them had. He read on screen. He did not read sequentially. He flipped through sections in a pattern that looked random, and probably wasn't, pausing at certain pages for longer than others, occasionally going back. He did not make notes yet. He just read. After 8 minutes, she was counting, not obviously, but she was counting. He stopped on a page. He looked at it. He said, "Page 394. She leaned forward slightly. "The variable definition in Appendix C." He turned the laptop a degree and looked at something to the left of the screen. An internal calculation, she thought, or a mental diagram being drawn. They define T prime as a function of the index basket, but the clause references T subprime. That's what our counsel said, the abbreviation discrepancy. "It's not a discrepancy," he said. The flatness of his certainty made her sit very still. T subprime appears in exactly 3 places in this document, pages 187, 308, and 402. Look at 187. She navigated there. First occurrence. It's in a subordination provision, the hierarchy of creditor rights in a restructuring event. He looked at her. "You see it?" She read it twice. "The subordination applies subject to T subprime adjustments as determined under Schedule F." "Right. And Schedule F says?" She flipped to it. "The adjustment matrix references current period performance relative to target thresholds." "Who defines the target thresholds?" She found the definition. She read it. She looked up at him. "Fortuna," she said. "Fortuna," he said. "Now go to 402. She went. Last occurrence of T subprime. 3 paragraphs from the end of the reps and warranties section. What's the full sentence? She read it, slowly. Then she read it again. Her voice, when it came, was very controlled. The performance adjustment under subsection 14D clause 3 operates as a reversionary mechanism, subject to thresholds established by T subprime parameters as defined under Schedule F, and may be exercised by the originating party within 24 months of closing, at its sole election. Silence. Sole election, Ryan said. Sole election, she repeated. They can define the threshold, they can set the trigger, and they can exercise it or not exercise it entirely at their own discretion, within 2 years of you taking on all the integration debt and restructuring costs. He looked at her. You would have handed them a 2-year option on 31% of your governance structure. at their discretion, for free. The kitchen was very quiet. Outside, somewhere on the street, a car passed. A distant lawnmower. The particular suburban silence of a Tuesday afternoon. "Why didn't anyone catch this?" she asked. Not defensive, genuinely asking. "Because it's in 3 places and each instance looks like a different kind of provision. One looks like subordination language. One looks like a performance matrix cross-reference. One looks like standard reps and warranties boilerplate. You'd have to see all 3 simultaneously to understand what they're doing together." "You saw it in... how long?" "I read the document in sections I'd expect problems in. Appendix C was obvious. Subordination provisions are always worth reading twice. The reps and warranties tale is where people hide things because by the time you get there, everyone's tired." She was looking at him with an expression he couldn't entirely read. "The variable," he said. "T subprime. Someone named it that intentionally. Subprime." He paused. "That's either a joke or a signal to the people who built the structure so they could find it later. Either way, it tells you this wasn't accidental." Vanessa sat back in her chair. This was not a woman who sat back in chairs. She sat forward, she leaned in, she engaged with everything at full capacity. The movement was involuntary, the physical expression of something recalibrating. "Is it fixable?" she said. "The deal?" "Yes. Yes. You excise the 3-clause structure. Redraft 14D with a fixed performance matrix defined by a publicly verifiable external index, remove Schedule F as a cross-reference mechanism entirely, and add a non-discretionary exercise provision." He paused. "You'll also want to add a representation that no undisclosed defined terms exist in the agreement. That way, if they try this again in a subsequent amendment, they're in breach." She stared at him. "You understood all of that," he said. Not a question, an observation. "I ran a structured finance operation for 4 years before I went into tech acquisition," she said. "I know what the words mean." He nodded. "Then your lawyers can implement it. What I gave you is the structure. The language is their job." She nodded once. Her eyes were still on him. "Mr. Bennett," she said. "Ryan." "Ryan," she stopped. "I need to ask you something, and I'd like you to be honest with me." "Okay." "Earlier today, a truck was towed from outside this building." She watched his face. "I ordered it towed. I didn't ask whether it was a delivery vehicle. I just wanted it gone." A beat of silence. "That was your truck?" He looked at her. "Yeah." "Philip found you on your address. When I looked at the address, I recognized the block." She was not looking away. Whatever this cost her, she was not looking away. "I wanted you to know that I know that." Ryan looked at her for a moment. Then he looked at the laptop. "The impound lot's on Crane Street," he said. "In case you didn't know." "I know where it is," she said quietly. "I'll handle the fee." "Already handled." Another silence. "Ryan, the more important thing," he said, "is that you cancel the signing, notify Fortuna that you've identified a structural issue requiring revision, and give your counsel 48 hours to rebuild the clause framework." He closed the laptop gently and slid it back toward her. "Don't let them know what you found specifically. Keep the information advantage." She nodded. She picked up the laptop. She started to stand. "The little girl," she said. "Was that your daughter? In the truck?" "Yeah." "How old is she?" 7. Vanessa was quiet for a moment. "She was very calm." "She's generally calm," he said. "She looks like you." He didn't answer this. He just stood and walked toward the door, which was his way of ending the part of a conversation he didn't know what to do with. She followed him. At the door she stopped. "I can write you a check," she said. "Tonight. What you did. I don't want a check." "Ryan, I'm serious." He said it without anger, which somehow made it more final than if he'd been annoyed. "I looked at a document for 15 minutes. Your lawyers will do the heavy lifting on the fix. That's what you're paying them for." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, "Thank you." He nodded. She walked to her car. A black sedan, quiet engine, the kind of car that costs enough to be invisible in its restraint. He watched it pull away from the curb. Then he went inside, finished his cold sandwich, and called the repair shop about the rescheduled 11 o'clock. He did not think about what she would do next. He did not think about what the check might have been for, or whether he'd made an error in refusing it, or what any of it meant about who he was now versus who he'd been. He thought about Lily, who needed picking up at 3:15. He thought about whether there was anything at home for dinner. He thought about the truck, which needed an oil change he'd been postponing for 3 weeks. He went to pick up his daughter. The day had been strange and expensive and oddly full. He filed it in the general category of things that happen and cannot be predicted, which was where he filed most things, and he drove the old truck to the school and waited by the entrance with the other parents until the double doors opened and the children came spilling out. Lily emerged fourth or fifth in the stream. She had someone else's marker on her left hand, a zigzag line that went from her wrist to her middle knuckle. She had her bag slung over one shoulder with the casual competence of someone who'd been carrying bags their entire life. She saw him and walked over. "How was the rest of your day?" she asked. It was her standard question. She asked it the same way every time, not with the performed interest of someone who'd been told to ask, but with the flat, genuine curiosity of someone who actually wanted to know. "Strange," he said. She considered this. Good strange or bad strange? He thought about it. "Medium," he said. She nodded like this was a satisfactory answer. They walked to the truck together. The signing never happened. By 6 o'clock that evening, every person who had been in the pre-signing conference room knew this, and most of them had spent the intervening hours in the particular productive panic that follows the discovery of a near catastrophe. Not paralyzed, but moving fast and talking faster, drafts flying between floors, phones ringing in offices that had gone quiet only recently. Vanessa sat in her chair at the head of the conference table and ran the room the way she always ran rooms, with the kind of controlled authority that left no ambiguity about who was making decisions. But something had shifted in the quality of her silence between statements. It was subtle enough that most of the people in the room would not have noticed it. Marco noticed it. David Chun noticed it, because David Chun noticed everything, which was why he was still employed by a woman who went through people quickly when they failed to notice things. The shift was this. Vanessa Sterling was listening differently than she usually did. Usually she listened with the forward attention of someone anticipating the moment when she'd have enough information to act. Efficient listening, strategic listening. Tonight she was listening with something more like patience, sitting back a fraction of an inch, letting people finish their sentences before she responded, asking questions she might previously have considered unnecessary. Chun noticed it and filed it without comment. At 6:30, after the outside council partners had left with a revised scope of work and a deadline that made at least one associate visibly pale, Vanessa told Marco to go home. He looked at her. "Go," she said. "You've been here since 6 this morning." "So have you." Ms. Shaz. "I'm the one who almost signed away 31% of this company's governance structure to people who hit a ghost variable in a contract. I get to stay late." He didn't argue with this logic, because it was the kind of logic that was also partly punishment, and she was entitled to it. He gathered his things and left. She sat alone at the long conference table with the revised document spread in front of her, and a cup of coffee she'd stopped drinking an hour ago because it had gone completely cold, and she hadn't noticed until now. She thought about a kitchen table, a laptop screen, reading glasses retrieved from a shelf in a garage that smelled like motor oil, a grease-smudged shirt cuff, a man who had walked her through the mechanism of a near disaster in the same flat, direct tone he might have used to explain a broken circuit board, and who had then declined the check she offered with the serene disinterest of someone to whom the money was simply not the point. She was not accustomed to people for whom money was not the point. Her phone was on the table. She looked at it. She picked it up and typed a text to Philip Okafor. "How well did you actually know Ryan Bennett?" Philip's reply came back in 4 minutes, which meant he was still at his desk. Enough to know he was the best structural analyst I've ever seen in a room. "Why?" She set the phone down. She looked at the cold coffee. She thought about a 7-year-old girl standing on a sidewalk next to a cone, calm as standing water, while her father's truck was loaded onto a flatbed. This thought was not comfortable. She did not reach for comfort. She let it sit there and be what it was. Ryan had not told Lily about any of it. This was not a deliberate omission. He didn't think of it as something to protect her from, or something she was too young for. It was more that the events of the day had a quality he hadn't fully processed yet himself, and he didn't have the habit of externalizing things before they'd settled. His ex-wife, Lily's mother Claire, who had died 3 years ago from an illness that had given them 14 months of warning and still arrived as a surprise, had always said that Ryan experienced the world about 4 to 6 hours behind everyone else. Not because he was slow, but because he didn't perform responses. He waited until he actually had one. So they had dinner, pasta, jarred sauce, the frozen garlic bread that Lily treated as a legitimate food group. And he asked her about school, and she told him about a conflict at recess involving a game with disputed rules, which she described with the careful structural analysis of a small lawyer, laying out each party's position before delivering her own assessment. "Who do you think was right?" Ryan asked. "Me," she said. "But I might be biased." "What makes you think you're biased?" "Because I wanted the game to go the way I wanted it to go." She ate a piece of garlic bread. "Mrs. Okafor says wanting something doesn't make you wrong, but it makes it harder to know if you're right." Ryan looked at his daughter. "Mrs. Okafor's pretty smart," he said. "She's very smart. She just writes slow in the book." After dinner, he washed the dishes while Lily did homework at the kitchen table, the same table where he'd sat 3 hours earlier with a stranger's laptop, and found a hidden trap in a 400-page document. The table had a water stain near one corner and a scratch that ran diagonally across the surface that had been there since before he'd bought the table at an estate sale 4 years ago. He knew every mark on it. It was a good table. Lily went to bed at 9. He read 2 chapters of a novel about horses that she had very strong feelings about. Feelings he'd had to adapt to quickly. Because when she said read it with voices, she meant it as a technical specification, not a suggestion. He did the voices. He was not good at the voices. She corrected him periodically. "That's not how the mare sounds." "How does the mare sound?" "Lower. She's tired." "She's been tired since chapter 4. She has a lot going on." He adjusted the voice. Lily seemed satisfied. She fell asleep before the end of the second chapter, which was standard, and he finished the paragraph anyway because it felt wrong to stop mid-sentence. He sat in the chair beside her bed for a moment in the dark, the book in his lap, listening to her breathe with the settled rhythm of someone who had no unresolved business with the day. He thought about the variable, T subprime, named that way on purpose, almost certainly. Someone in Fortuna's legal architecture team had been clever, and had trusted that clever enough, hidden deeply enough, was invisible to everyone. And they had been right. Dozens of smart, trained, expensive people had read the document and not seen it. He'd found it in the way he'd always found things. Not by looking harder than everyone else, but by looking at the places where the structure didn't quite match its apparent purpose. He had that ability. He'd always had it. He'd spent 5 years being paid extremely well for it, and then he'd chosen to stop, and he didn't regret the choice, but he couldn't pretend the ability had left him. It was just sitting there inside him the way certain things sit, not useful in his daily life, not harmful, just present. He went back downstairs. He poured himself a glass of water and stood at the kitchen counter and looked at his phone. There was a missed call from an unknown number, Saab. The same one from earlier, the one from Vanessa Sterling or her office. And then, below it, a text from a number he also didn't recognize, sent 12 minutes ago. "This is Vanessa Sterling. I know you said no to the check. I wanted to let you know the fee from the impound lot has been handled. I spoke to the tow company's dispatch and reversed the charge to your account. I know that wasn't what you wanted either, but it seemed like the right thing. VS." He read it twice. He put the phone face down on the counter. He stood there for a moment. Then he picked it back up and typed, "You didn't have to do that." The reply came back faster than he expected, which meant she was still awake, probably still at the office. "I know, it's not a payment, it's just accurate." He wasn't entirely sure what to do with that. He put the phone down again and went to check the back door lock, which had been sticking recently, and then went to bed. He slept adequately, which was how he slept most nights. Not badly, not particularly well. Claire used to say he slept like a machine that powered down between tasks, and it wasn't entirely wrong. The news broke on Wednesday morning. Not publicly. The acquisition itself wasn't public knowledge in its specifics, and Vanessa's team had been careful with the cancellation announcement, framing it as a mutual decision to extend the review period. But within the professional universe of corporate finance and M&A law, which was smaller and faster talking than most people realized, word traveled with the specific velocity of information that people are both prohibited from sharing and incapable of not sharing. By 10 a.m., 3 separate people had called Philip Okafor with some version of the same question: what happened with the Caldwell-Harmon deal? He told them all the same thing: ongoing review, nothing further to disclose. Then he called Ryan. Ryan was under the diagnostic bench at the Carver Street shop again. His phone rang and he looked at the screen and saw Philip's name and felt the small surprise of a connection that had been dormant for 6 years suddenly flickering on. He answered. "Philip." "Ryan." A pause that had warmth in it. The warmth of people who'd worked well together and left on decent terms and simply lost track. "I won't ask how you are because apparently I know how you are. I know you fix equipment now." "Yeah. And you still read contracts." "Apparently." "You saved her company," Philip said. Not dramatically, just as a factual statement. Ryan thought about this. "Her lawyers saved the company. I just pointed at the mechanism." "Nobody else pointed at the mechanism, Ryan. I had 12 people in that room. Different skill set." "Right." Philip was quiet for a moment. "She's going to want to do something for you. You should let her." "I already told her no." "I know. She told me. She's going to want to try again." Ryan shifted slightly, the concrete floor hard against his shoulder blades. Above him, the underside of the diagnostic bench had a slightly jury-rigged quality he'd been meaning to address. "She already reversed the impound fee. That's not nothing. That's also not what I mean. Philip, I'm not lobbying for her. I'm just saying." Philip paused. "She's not the same person she was at 9 a.m. yesterday. I've worked with her for 2 years, and I've never seen her wrong-footed before. Whatever you said to her, it did something." "I didn't say anything. I looked at a document." "You said something about the truck." Ryan was quiet. "She told me," Philip said, "that she told you. That she'd been the one who had it towed." "She did. And you still helped her." "I helped her because the document was interesting and because you used to buy everyone lunch on Fridays without making it a thing." He paused. "Tell her I said she should focus on the redraft and not worry about what she owes me. There's no balance sheet on this." Philip seemed to think about this. "She's not going to be able to just leave it alone." "That's her problem," Ryan said, not unkindly. "Yeah," Philip said. "I guess it is. But check. It was in fact Vanessa's problem. She knew herself well enough to know that she operated poorly in the presence of unresolved obligations. Debt she could not pay made her restless in a way that was almost physical. A low-grade agitation that interfered with her sleep and quality of thought, and on one memorable occasion 3 years ago involving a business contact she'd inadvertently misled. Her appetite, which was already undiscriminating enough to be a running joke among her senior staff. Ryan Bennett had declined money. He had declined credit. He had, as best she could determine, no professional ambition in her direction, no interest in returning to the financial world she occupied, and no apparent desire for the kind of public acknowledgement she could theoretically offer. He had also somehow helped her anyway, driven by what seemed to be a combination of intellectual interest and the ghost of a professional loyalty to Philip that had nothing to do with her. She couldn't pay the debt because he didn't believe it was a debt. This was both philosophically coherent and deeply irritating. She focused on what she could control. The redraft was underway. Her counsel had taken Ryan's structural analysis and built it into a 14-point revision that surgically removed Fortuna's hidden mechanism and replaced it with terms that were explicit, verifiable, and non-discretionary. Fortuna's attorneys received the revised draft on Wednesday afternoon. Their response, a 4-hour silence followed by a carefully worded acknowledgement that several provisions require further discussion, confirmed as definitively as anything short of a confession that the variable had been deliberate. They knew she'd found it. They didn't know how. Vanessa let Chun manage the subsequent negotiation, which he did with the calm, methodical thoroughness of someone who now knew exactly where the bodies were buried and wasn't going to pretend otherwise. The restructured deal came together over the following week with a different character, less smooth, more honest, both sides aware that the other side was watching. It would close, eventually, on terms that were clean, but that was the future. In the present, it was Thursday morning, and Vanessa was in the back of a car on the way to a meeting she'd rescheduled twice already, reading a brief on her phone while her driver navigated traffic, when she looked up and saw, through the window, an old pickup truck. Not Ryan's truck. Different color, different model, decades older. But the sight of it caught her in a way that surprised her, a small, unexpected hook in the chest that she identified after a moment as guilt that hadn't fully finished metabolizing. She thought about the 7-year-old standing on the sidewalk. She thought about a lot of things on that car ride that she hadn't been in the habit of thinking about before Tuesday. She did something that Friday that she had not done in at least 3 years. She left the office at 5 o'clock. Not 5:45, not 6. Not the 7:30 that had become her actual standard, while 5:30 remained the aspirational fiction she told herself every Sunday evening. She gathered her things at 4:58, told Marco she was leaving, and watched his face cycle through surprise, concern, and a rapid professional recalibration in about 2 seconds. "Is everything okay?" he asked. "Everything is fine. I'm leaving at 5 because it's 5. He nodded with the careful supportiveness of someone witnessing an event he would later describe to his friends as unusual. She went home. Her apartment was on the 23rd floor of a residential tower near the river, and it was the kind of apartment that looked exactly like what it was, a place where someone slept and changed clothes, and occasionally ate meals that had been delivered in containers, and which served as a secondary office when the primary office became inconvenient. It was well-designed and aggressively impersonal. There was a painting on the living room wall that she had bought because the gallery had seemed like a reasonable thing to buy art in, and which she had never particularly liked, and which now seemed, for reasons she couldn't articulate, to be annoying her in a new way. She stood in the middle of her living room in her work clothes for a while. Then she ordered dinner, an actual meal, from a restaurant she'd heard Marco mention liking, instead of the protein-forward assembly of things she usually ordered on autopilot, and sat at her dining table and ate it without looking at her phone, which was more difficult than it sounds and required several restarts. She thought about what Philip had said. Whatever you said to her, it did something. What Ryan had said to her, in total, across their entire conversation at his kitchen table, was not much by volume. He had explained the mechanism. He had told her how to fix it. He had declined her money. He had accepted her acknowledgement about the truck without performing forgiveness or withholding it. He had simply acknowledged it and moved past it, with the same no-ceremony directness he brought to everything else. He was not impressive in the way she was used to people being impressive. He didn't take up room. He didn't perform competence. He just had it. Quietly, undecorated, attached to nothing except the problem in front of him, and then, when the problem was done, his daughter's school pickup time. She had met a great many successful people. She had met people with extraordinary minds, and people with extraordinary drive, and people who combined the two into something formidable. She had not recently met someone who seemed to have made a genuine and considered peace with what their life looked like from the outside. She didn't know what to do with that. She also didn't know why she kept thinking about it. She finished her dinner. She washed the container out of some half-remembered domestic instinct. She stood at her window and looked at the city and thought, for the first time in a long time, that she had been running toward something for so many years that she'd stopped examining whether the thing was worth running toward. This was not a comfortable thought. She let it stay anyway. The following Tuesday, 9 days after the almost signing, Vanessa was in a meeting with her strategy team when her phone vibrated with a text from a number she now recognized. "Your council sent a thank you fruit basket to my house. You should know that Lily ate most of it before I knew it arrived." She stared at this for 3 seconds in the middle of a conversation about Q3 infrastructure projections. Then she excused herself, stepped out, and typed back, "I didn't send a fruit basket. That was David Chun. He's been trying to find a way to thank you for a week." A pause. Then, "Tell him the pears were good." She left the kiwis. "Does your daughter not like kiwi? She's suspicious of foods that require special handling." Vanessa stood in the hallway outside the strategy room and looked at this text and felt something move through her chest that she was fairly certain was laughter trying to happen. She pressed it down with the automatic discipline of someone for whom the office hallway was not a place for that. She typed, "That's a reasonable position." Another pause. "How's the redraft going?" Not a question, checking in, which was, she hadn't expected that. "Well, Fortuna has accepted most of the revisions. Chun thinks we'll close in 3 weeks." "Good. Watch Schedule F. Make sure the new performance matrix has an independent auditor clause. Otherwise, they might try to contest the calculations," she typed. "Yes." Chun already added that. "Okay. You've been thinking about it." A longer pause this time. "Old habit," he replied. She went back into the meeting. She answered questions about Q3 infrastructure with her usual precision. She did not look at her phone again until the meeting ended. When it ended, she typed one more message. "Ryan, thank you, not for the document, for being someone worth being ashamed in front of." She looked at this for a moment, then sent it before she could edit it into something less honest. His reply came back 20 minutes later. "You weren't that bad." She read this 3 times, then she put her phone in her bag and went to the next meeting. Eat. Lily Bennett had no idea that her father had been texting a billionaire. She knew that he'd had a strange Tuesday a week and a half ago, and that the truck fee had somehow been refunded. He'd mentioned this casually at dinner, the way he mentioned most financial developments, as a flat factual statement without surrounding narrative. And she'd filed this information without particular comment because she was 7 and financial mechanisms were not yet her primary area of interest. What she had noticed was that her father seemed less tired. This was not something she had the vocabulary to articulate precisely, or would have articulated even if she had. She was not a child who narrated her observations aloud in real time. She just held them the way she held most things, quietly, with patience, watching to see if they developed into something she understood better. But she noticed. He was still the same Ryan Bennett, still made the same pasta, still did the voices when she asked for voices, still sat in the chair beside her bed, and finished the paragraph even after she fell asleep. Still drove the truck with the knocking engine. Still sometimes stood in the kitchen looking at nothing for a while, which was a thing he'd always done, and which she'd learned meant he was thinking and not that something was wrong, though distinguishing between these had taken her a while. But there was something different in the quality of his attention this week, like he was slightly more present than he'd been. Not dramatically, not in a way that a stranger would notice. She noticed. On Friday evening, while he was washing dishes and she was sitting on the counter eating an apple, a position she was technically not allowed to be in, but which he never enforced with any real conviction, she said, without particular preamble, "Dad, what happened on Tuesday?" He turned and looked at her. "What do you mean?" "The truck thing. And then you were gone longer than normal. And then someone sent a fruit basket." "I told you about the fruit basket." "You said a lawyer sent it. Why would a lawyer send us fruit?" He was quiet for a moment, running a bowl under the water. "I helped someone with something at work." "What kind of work?" "A document. A complicated legal document." "I thought you fixed equipment." "I do." "But you also read legal documents." He looked at her. "I used to do that kind of thing a long time ago." Lily ate her apple, considered this. "Before I was born?" "Before you were born, when I worked in the city." "In an office?" "Yeah." "Do you miss it?" He thought about this with the seriousness he gave to her actual questions. "Not really, some of it." He paused. "The interesting problems, not the rest of it." She seemed to accept this. Then, "Was the person you helped nice?" Another pause. "She's getting there." Lily looked at him. This was a more complicated answer than she'd expected, and she had learned that when her father gave a more complicated answer than expected, it usually meant the real answer was longer than he was ready to give. "Okay," she said. She jumped off the counter and took her apple to the living room. Ryan stood at the sink for another moment, water running over his hands, looking at the window above the faucet where the evening light was doing something particular to the backyard that he would have called nice if he'd been in the habit of narrating his observations. He wasn't in the habit of narrating his observations. He turned off the water. He dried his hands. He He went and sat on the couch and watched 30 minutes of a nature documentary with Lily, who had opinions about the narrator's pacing, and then put her to bed, and then sat in the quiet kitchen with no laptop and no contract and no emergency, and for the first time in several days felt the strange minor weight of a world that was not asking him for anything. It was not an unpleasant weight. He was trying to decide what to do with it when his phone buzzed. Vanessa's number. I know this is out of nowhere, but do you still remember the Carver-Walsh subordination case from 2017? I found a reference to it in something Fortuna filed, and I think it might be relevant to how they've been using this structure before. He looked at this message. He thought about what it would mean to answer it. Not the answer itself, but what answering it implied about the shape of things going forward. Then he thought, the problem is interesting. He picked up the phone and typed, the Carver-Walsh case was settled confidentially, but the structure you're describing has a precedent in the Delmar Energy secondary filing from 2018. I'll send you the citation. Her reply was immediate. You have that memorized? I have a lot of things memorized that aren't useful anymore. A pause. Maybe some of them are. He looked at that for a moment. Then he sent her the citation, put the phone down, and went to bed. He slept better than he had in a while. He wouldn't have been able to explain why. He was not the kind of person who examined that kind of thing too closely. He just noted it, the way he noted the truck's knock in the morning, and filed it in the category of information that might mean something eventually. The night was quiet. Down the hall, Lily slept her machine-like sleep, breathing in the settled rhythm of someone who had no outstanding accounts with the day. Outside, the city did what cities do, never entirely stopping, never entirely silent, running its own complicated systems of cause and consequence underneath the surface of things, indifferent to the small private negotiations happening in apartments and kitchens and hallway phone calls, in all the ordinary places where people sometimes, quietly, begin to reconsider what they thought they already knew. The Delmar Energy citation turned out to be more relevant than either of them had anticipated. Vanessa sent it to Chun on Saturday morning with a note that said only, check the secondary filing structure against our Schedule F revision. Chun called her 40 minutes later, and she could tell from the 2 seconds of silence before he spoke that he had found something. Where did this come from? He asked. A source. Another pause. The same source from last Tuesday. Yes. Sterling. His voice had the quality it got when he was choosing words with more care than usual. You should consider whether this person would be willing to consult more formally. What he's doing informally is already beyond what I can replicate with my team. He's not interested in formal arrangements. Have you asked recently? She had not asked recently. She had been sending him citations and questions via text message for 9 days, and he had been answering them with the flat, efficient thoroughness of someone who found the problems worth engaging with and had not yet said otherwise. She had not pushed it toward anything more defined because she had the instinct, and it was only instinct, she had no data, that pushing would cause him to pull back. I'll think about it, she told Chun. What she actually did was sit with the question for 3 days without asking it, which was uncharacteristic of her, and which she recognized as uncharacteristic of her, and which she did anyway. The Delmar structure, once Chun's team mapped it against the current deal, revealed that Fortuna had used a variation of the same mechanism in at least 2 prior acquisitions. In one case, the target company had apparently never noticed. In the other, the deal had collapsed under conditions that, at the time, were attributed to market factors. Chun was now fairly certain the collapse had been engineered. This changed the negotiation significantly. When Fortuna's counsel received the revised terms that Wednesday, a package that now included representations about prior transaction conduct and a specific prohibition on ghost variable structuring defined in terms precise enough to be unmistakable, the response took 6 hours and came from a different attorney than had been handling the deal previously. The new attorney's name was Harrison Vale. He was, according to the 3 people Vanessa called to ask about him in the 30 minutes after his name appeared on the correspondence, someone Fortuna deployed when they wanted to signal that the earlier approach had been a misunderstanding and everyone should remain calm. They're scared, Chun said. They should be, Vanessa said. We have leverage we didn't have 2 weeks ago. I know. This source of yours abound, I'll handle the source, she said. You handle Vale. Chun handled Vale. Vanessa handled nothing immediately because handling Ryan Bennett had turned out to be a category of problem that didn't respond to the approaches she normally used for problems. She sent him a text that evening that said, Fortuna brought in new counsel, someone named Harrison Vale. Do you know him? His reply came back after 20 minutes, which was longer than his usual response time, and probably meant he'd been in the middle of something physical, under a machine, hands busy, phone not accessible. Vale worked for the same firm as Fortuna's original outside counsel 6 years ago. Different practice group, but same building. He specializes in salvage negotiations. When a deal goes sideways and someone needs to recenter it without admitting wrongdoing. So they're trying to save the deal. They're trying to save face. There's a difference. Watch whether Vale proposes any changes to the governance structure provisions or whether he focuses entirely on the language around prior transactions. Why does that distinction matter? If he goes for the governance language, they still want the deal on their original terms, and they're negotiating. If he avoids it and focuses on the prior transaction reps, they've cut their losses on the mechanism, and they just want out of the liability exposure. She stared at this for a moment. You've been thinking about this. You keep sending me things to think about. This was true. She had been sending him things to think about, which was either a professional relationship developing organically or something else developing less professionally, and she had been deliberately not examining which one it was because she was busy and because examination had a way of disrupting things that were working. Vale's first call is Thursday, she typed. I'll tell you how it goes. Okay. She set the phone down, picked it back up. Ryan, yeah. Thank you for the Del Mar citation. It changed everything. A pause longer than his usual ones. You would have found it eventually. I wouldn't have, she typed. My lawyers are good. They're not built the way you're built. She sent it before she could reconsider the phrasing. He didn't reply to that one, which she decided not to interpret. Malkit. Ryan noticed that he was spending more time thinking about Fortuna's legal architecture than he had budgeted. He noticed this the way he noticed most things about his own behavior, without particular alarm, with a certain practical attention, the way you'd notice that a machine was running warmer than its specs suggested, and try to determine whether this indicated a problem or simply a new operating condition. The problem-solving part of his brain, which had been running at about 15% capacity for 6 years, had apparently decided that 15% was no longer the appropriate setting. It had ratcheted itself up, not dramatically, but perceptibly, like a thermostat that had been manually held at a certain temperature and had finally been released to seek its own equilibrium. He wasn't sure how he felt about this. He was also spending more time on his phone than was normal for him, which Lily had noticed with the low-key observational precision she brought to all household phenomena. You're texting a lot, she said one morning, not accusingly, just noting. Work thing, he said. The complicated document work or the equipment work? Document. She nodded like this was satisfactory. Then, is it the same person as before? Yeah. She considered this. Is she nice now? He looked at his daughter. He had not told her that the person he was helping was a woman. Lily had apparently arrived at this conclusion through other means. Getting there, he said, which was the same thing he'd said before. Lily seemed to find this a consistent data point. The truth was that Vanessa Sterling was easier to talk to than he would have predicted from their first meeting. Not easier in the sense of uncomplicated. She was not uncomplicated. She was demanding and precise, and occasionally sent 3 follow-up texts in rapid succession when she thought of additional questions, which he had started to recognize as her natural mode of operation rather than impatience. She was also, underneath the precision, genuinely curious. Not performed curiosity. Not the kind where someone asks questions to demonstrate interest. Real curiosity, the kind that went tangential, that followed the thread wherever it led regardless of whether the destination was useful. He respected real curiosity. He also respected that she had not, in 9 days of text correspondence, mentioned the truck again, or the impound fee, or the fact that she'd ordered the tow in the first place. She'd acknowledged it once, at his kitchen table, and then she'd left it alone. This was, in his experience, how adults of reasonable self-awareness handled things they were ashamed of. Once, clearly, and then moving forward. Not repeatedly, which would be self-flagellation performing as accountability. Not never, which would be avoidance. Once. He found he had no residual anger about it. He wasn't sure he'd had much to begin with. People made fast assumptions about other people based on visible signals all the time. He'd done it himself and would again. The truck was old. The building was expensive. The math was obvious, even if the conclusion was wrong. What he'd minded was not the assumption, but the lack of a question. The way the decision had been made at a distance, from 42 floors up, without a single second of curiosity about what the truck was doing there. She seemed to know that. She seemed to be working on the question part. He didn't know what to do with a person who was actively working on their faults. Most people he encountered had arrived at a more or less settled relationship with their own limitations. Not unchanged, but not under active renovation either. Vanessa Sterling seemed to be in the process of revising herself, not superficially, but structurally, and she was doing it with the same analytical intensity she brought to acquisition documents, which was either admirable or exhausting, and was possibly both. He found himself thinking about this while he was driving to the Carver Street shop on a Thursday morning, which told him something. He wasn't sure what it told him. He was 4 to 6 hours behind everyone else, emotionally, according to Claire. He would give it time. Thursday's call with Harrison Vale lasted 2 hours and 12 minutes. Vanessa sat at the head of the conference table with Chun on her left, and 2 associates arrayed with tablets and color-coded annotations. Vale was on the other end of the line with, she assumed, a similar configuration. He was a careful, measured speaker. Not warm, but not cold either. The professional temperature of someone whose job was to move things from dangerous positions to manageable ones. He did not touch the governance structure provisions. He spent 45 minutes on the prior transaction representation language, proposing modifications that would narrow the scope of Fortuna's disclosure obligations while maintaining the surface appearance of transparency. Chun pushed back on each modification with the methodical patience of a person who had done exactly this kind of thing for 19 years and had excellent stamina for it. At the hour and 40 mark, Vale said, "I think we're aligned on the fundamental interest in completing this transaction." "We are," Vanessa said. It was the first time she'd spoken directly in 20 minutes. "Our client remains committed to the partnership." "Good. Then our client will accept the governance and prior transaction representations as currently drafted, and we can move toward a revised closing date." She paused. "Those provisions are not negotiable." A silence on the line. The particular silence of someone running calculations. "I'll need to consult with my client," Vale said. "Of course." The call ended. Chun looked at her. The associates looked at their tablets in the careful way of people who had learned not to visibly react until the senior people established the register. "That went better than I expected," Chun said. He never went near the governance language. "No. He wants out of the liability. He doesn't want the mechanism anymore." Chun nodded slowly. "They'll accept the terms. They'll try one more round, one more modification to the prior transaction rep, something small enough to seem reasonable. We'll accept it if it's genuinely small. We'll reject it if it's not." She gathered her papers. "But they're done. Ryan was right." Chun was quiet for a moment. "You should ask him to formalize this." "David, Sterling, I'm not being political. I'm being practical." He looked at her directly, which he only did when he was about to say something he'd decided to say regardless of how it was received. "This is the second time in 2 weeks that a text message from a repair technician has moved our negotiating position more than anything my team produced. I have 12 lawyers. He has a cell phone and apparently a perfect memory. I'd like to understand the arrangement." She looked at him. "The arrangement," she said carefully, "is informal." "I know it's informal. I'm asking if it should remain that way." "That's not your decision." "I know that too." He held her gaze. "I'm just asking the question." She looked at the table for a moment, at the papers in front of her, at the window, where the city was doing its usual late-morning thing, indifferent and ongoing. "I'll think about it," she said. She thought about it in the car on the way back from a lunch meeting. She thought about it during the meeting itself, which she attended with her full professional attention while a separate part of her brain ran a parallel process in the background. She thought about it at her desk at 4 o'clock when she finally opened a text conversation with Ryan and typed and deleted 4 different versions of the same question before settling on the direct one. Chun thinks I should ask you to consult formally. Retainer, defined scope, the whole structure. What do you think? She set the phone face up on her desk and continued working. His reply came 18 minutes later. What does formally mean to you? She thought about this. Regular availability, defined subject matter, acquisitions, structural analysis, document review. Compensation. I'm not going back to wearing a suit. She looked at this for a moment. Then she typed, nobody said anything about a suit. Finance people always want suits eventually. I'm not most finance people. A pause. No, he replied. You're not. She waited. I'll think about it, he typed. What's the subject matter scope you're thinking? And there it was. The question, not the yes, but the question, which with Ryan Bennett was how agreement began. She recognized this now. He didn't lead with positions. He led with questions, and the questions were genuine. And if the answers were satisfactory, he moved. If they weren't, he said so plainly. She typed out a scope, 3 paragraphs, specific and non-bureaucratic, the kind of thing she'd written many times for very different arrangements. She sent it. He read it and came back with 2 modifications, both of which were reasonable and one of which she should have thought of herself. She accepted both. Okay, he typed. Trial basis. 3 months. We reassess. 3 months, she agreed. She put the phone down and went back to work. Something in her chest was lighter than it had been an hour ago, which she acknowledged and then set aside because she had 4 more hours of work to get through, and lightness was not something she'd yet figured out how to be productive inside. She called Philip that evening. He picked up on the second ring, which meant he was still at his desk or at home and actively watching his phone, which meant he'd been expecting her call. He agreed to a trial arrangement, she said. I know. He called me. She stopped. He called you. He wanted a third-party opinion on whether the scope was reasonable or whether you were going to try to expand it incrementally. A pause. I told him the scope was reasonable and that you might try to expand it incrementally, but that you'd stop if he pushed back. She was quiet for a moment. That's a fairly accurate assessment. I know you, Vanessa. Did he seem... What was his read on it? He seemed like himself, careful, not suspicious, just thorough. Philip paused. He asked me one other thing. What? He asked if I thought you were actually different from the person who towed his truck, or if the situation had just changed and you were adapting to the new situation. She felt this land somewhere specific. What did you tell him? I told him I'd worked for you for 2 years and I'd seen you tow a lot of trucks, metaphorically speaking, and that I thought you were genuinely trying to be different, and that it was too early to know for sure. That's honest? He deserved an honest answer. She sat with this. Outside her window, the river caught the last of the evening light and held it for a moment in the way it sometimes did, a flat, pewter brightness that lasted about 4 minutes before the sky changed and it was just water again. Philip, she said. Yeah. Do you think I'm different? A pause. Not a calculating pause. A genuine one. The pause of someone who is actually considering the question rather than managing toward an answer. I think you want to be, he said, and I think that's more than most people manage. She nodded, though he couldn't see it. Okay, she said. Okay, he said. Must-sets. Ryan told Lily about the consulting arrangement on a Friday evening, in the same kitchen, same table, same energy as all important domestic information in their household, matter-of-factly, during dinner, without ceremony. I'm going to do some extra work, he said. Reading and analysis, for a company. The same company as before? Same one. Lily ate her pasta. Will it make you busy? Some days more than others. I'll still pick you up. I know. She wasn't worried about the pickup. She was thinking about something else. Is it the complicated documents again? Yeah. Do you like doing it? He thought about this. The problems are interesting. Like puzzles? Kind of. More like You know how when the diagnostic machine at the shop gives a wrong reading, and you have to figure out whether the machine is wrong or the reading is right? She considered this with the focused attention she gave to comparisons she found useful. Yeah, it's like that. The document says one thing, but the structure says another, and you have to figure out which one is real. And you're good at that. I was good at it, getting back there. Lily nodded, ate more pasta. Then, is the lady who almost signed the bad thing the one you're working with? Ryan looked at her. She was 7. She had, apparently, constructed an entirely accurate model of events from the available fragments. Yeah, he said. Is she still getting there? He thought about Thursday's call with Vale, which Vanessa had texted him about in 4 messages that were progressively more satisfied in tone, ending with they never touched the governance language, which he'd known they wouldn't. He thought about her 2 clean, reasonable modifications to the scope document. He thought about what Philip had said, relayed at second hand, which he'd been turning over since yesterday. She wants to be different. That's more than most people manage. Getting there, he said. Lily seemed satisfied by the consistency of this answer. She finished her pasta. She helped clear the table without being asked, which happened about 40% of the time, and which Ryan had learned not to acknowledge directly in case acknowledgement disrupted the pattern. He stood at the sink, water running. He thought about 3 months. Trial basis. Reassess. He thought about the fact that he'd called Philip before agreeing, which he'd done deliberately, not because he didn't trust his own judgment, but because his own judgment on Vanessa Sterling was operating in a frequency range he wasn't fully confident about yet. Philip had given him what he needed, an honest read from someone who knew her, who wasn't selling anything. She might try to expand the scope. He'd push back. That was fine. He knew how to push back. What he didn't entirely know yet was what he was doing at the level below professional arrangement, at the level where he'd started checking his phone with a frequency that was not consistent with a purely functional text exchange about acquisition documents. He was self-aware enough to notice this. He was also self-aware enough to know that he was running 4 to 6 hours behind, and that forcing a conclusion before the conclusion was ready was a thing he'd learned the hard way not to do. He turned off the water. He dried his hands on the dish towel, a dish towel that had a small hole in one corner and a faded stripe pattern that had been a gift from someone at some point. He couldn't remember who, and which he'd kept using because it worked. He went and sat on the porch for a while. It was late September, the edge of the evening carrying the first actual coldness of fall, the kind that arrived in a specific part of the chest before it arrived anywhere else. The street was quiet. 2 houses down, a neighbor's kid was bouncing a ball against a garage door in the methodical, meditative way of children who are thinking about something else. His phone buzzed. Vanessa. Vale's office confirmed they'll accept the prior transaction reps as drafted. We're moving to revised closing in approximately 18 days. Chun says your Del Mar citation was what did it. Once they knew we had structural precedent, the liability math changed. He typed back, good. A pause. Then, Ryan. I want to say something, and I don't want it to be weird. He looked at this. Typed. Okay. I've been thinking about what you said at the table that day, about not measuring success by wealth or titles. A pause, then another message. You didn't say it to teach me anything. You just said it, but it's been sitting in my head for 2 weeks, and I think it changed something. He read this twice. He thought about Claire, who had always said that the things that changed you didn't feel like revelation when they arrived. They felt like a small stone dropping into still water, and the ripples were the thing, and you only saw the ripples later. I didn't say it to teach you anything, he typed. I said it because it's true. I know, she wrote. That's why it worked. He put the phone in his pocket. The ball-bouncing kid had gone inside. The street was very quiet now. The cold was more present, settling in the way that fall cold settled, patient, unhurried, indifferent to anyone's preference about summer. He sat there for another few minutes, not thinking about anything in particular, which was a thing he could do that some people couldn't. Just sitting, being in the specific cool Thursday evening of it. Then he went inside, locked the door, and checked on Lily, who was asleep and had somehow acquired, over the course of the evening, a stuffed animal he didn't recognize positioned under her left arm. He stood in her doorway for a moment. He didn't try to identify the stuffed animal. He just stood there in the quiet and let the moment be what it was. The formal arrangement started the following Monday. Ryan drove to his first official consultation at Meridian Tower in the old truck, which was running better since the oil change he'd finally done over the weekend. He wore jeans and a button-down shirt that was ironed, which represented the upper range of his professional wardrobe, and which Lily had surveyed that morning with the evaluative expression she used for food she hadn't tried before. "You look different," she said. "I ironed the shirt." She returned to her cereal. Then, "You look okay." He parked in a visitor space in the building's parking structure. Not the executive overhang, not anywhere near it, and took the elevator to the 42nd floor for the first time, which felt like a detail worth noting. The elevator doors opened onto an anteroom where Marco was waiting with the slightly startled expression of someone who had built a mental image of a person from context and was now recalibrating against the reality. "Mr. Bennett," Marco said. "Ryan's fine." "Ryan." He extended his hand. Ryan shook it. "Ms. Sterling is finishing a call. Can I get you anything while you wait? Coffee? Water?" "Coffee's fine." He sat in one of the chairs in the anteroom. He looked at the space. It had the quality of most high-floor corporate spaces, glass and considered materials, and a view that justified the altitude. It was impressive in the way that spaces designed to impress were impressive, which was not the same as impressive in the way that a beautifully reconditioned engine was impressive, but it was a thing. The office door opened. Vanessa came out. She looked like herself, the blazer, the pulled-back hair, the posture of someone who had spent considerable energy learning to take up exactly the right amount of space. But there was something in how she moved across the room that was marginally different from the woman who had stood on his porch. Less performance in it. She wasn't performing arrival. She was just arriving. "You found parking," she said. "Visitor structure." "Good." She looked at him for a moment, not the up-and-down assessment of their first meeting, something more level. "I'm glad you're here." "Me too," he said. He meant it in the simple sense. Glad that the work was interesting, glad that the arrangement had a structure that made sense, glad that the morning was clear and the truck had run well. He was not a person who front-loaded meaning, but he also was not, he realized as he stood and followed her into the office, a person who was entirely indifferent to the fact that he was here at all. That something had started with an old truck on a Tuesday morning, moved through a kitchen table and a hidden variable and a fruit basket and 9 days of text messages, and arrived at this room, this Monday morning, this new and tentative arrangement between two people who had started out badly and were trying, carefully, to do better. That was something. Not everything, not yet anything he could name, but something. He sat down across from her desk. She slid a document toward him across the surface. "Fortuna's final proposed amendment came in this morning," she said. "Before we discuss it, what's your read on why they'd propose a change at this stage, given what we know about Vail's mandate?" He looked at the document. The problem, as always, was interesting. He picked it up and started to read. Fortuna's final proposed amendment was, as Ryan read it, almost reasonable. That was the tell. He sat across from Vanessa's desk with the document in his hands and read it twice. Once quickly, the way he read everything first, to get the shape of it. Once slowly, the way he read things that were trying to look like something they weren't. The amendment proposed a minor revision to the audit clause in the prior transaction representation, narrowing the look-back period from 7 years to 5. Reasonable on its surface, 5 years was a defensible standard in plenty of acquisition contexts, and any competent attorney for either side could argue either number with a straight face. He set the document down. "They're testing whether you'll take a small win," he said. Vanessa was watching him from across the desk with the focused attention she brought to everything. She had a pen in her hand that she'd been turning over slowly while he read, which was the only visible sign that she was waiting. "Explain it," she said. "The amendment's real function isn't the look-back period. 5 versus 7 years doesn't change your actual exposure in this deal because the transactions we're worried about happened 4 years ago. They're inside both windows. What it changes is precedent. If you accept a negotiated modification to the prior transaction rep, you've established that the rep is negotiable, which means if there's future litigation and they want to argue the rep's scope, they have a negotiating history to point to. She looked at the document. So by accepting a seemingly small concession, you've opened a door that looks like a window. She was quiet for a moment. Chun didn't flag this. Chun was probably looking at the look-back period as a standalone provision. You have to look at what accepting a modification means structurally, not just what the modification says. Vanessa set her pen down. She looked at him with an expression he was starting to recognize. Not admiration exactly, more like the particular attention of someone recalibrating their understanding of how a thing worked. So we reject it, she said. You reject it. With a simple response, the rep is not subject to modification, and the current language is final. Don't negotiate. Don't offer a counterproposal. Just close the door. Vail will push back. Maybe, but he knows the game ended when they accepted the governance provisions. This is a face-saving move. If you refuse it cleanly, he has what he needs to go back to Fortuna and say he tried. She nodded slowly. And if he doesn't push back, then you close in 18 days on terms that are clean, and this is over. She looked at him for another moment. Then she picked up the pen again and wrote 2 words on the notepad in front of her. He couldn't read them from across the desk, but from the angle he thought they said reject, final. Okay, she said. Thank you. That's what Monday mornings are for. Something shifted in her expression. Not quite a smile, but the architecture of one. The way a room changes when the light changes, even if nothing moves. They fell into a rhythm over the next 3 weeks that neither of them had designed. He came to the office on Monday mornings and sometimes Wednesday afternoons, depending on what was in the pipeline. He read documents at his kitchen table on evenings when she sent things that needed overnight attention, which was 2 or 3 times a week, and had settled into a frequency that he'd adjusted to without making a decision about it. She called sometimes instead of texting when the issue was complex enough that typed shorthand was losing information. He answered or called back within the hour if he was under something with his hands occupied. They talked about documents, then sometimes about the context around the documents, the companies, the people involved, the structural logic of deals that had shaped industries. Then occasionally about things that were adjacent to this, tangentially connected, following whatever thread the conversation had developed. She had opinions about corporate governance theory that were sharper and more heterodox than her public position suggested. He had retained, somewhere in the 6-year gap, a detailed working knowledge of financial history that surfaced in unexpected ways. A reference to a 1987 arbitrage case here, a structural parallel to a 1990s debt restructuring there, connections that weren't in the documents but illuminated them. She started looking forward to the Monday mornings with a specificity that she recognized and didn't examine too closely. The deal closed on a Thursday, 17 days after the Monday when Ryan had rejected Fortuna's face-saving amendment on her behalf. It closed clean. Every provision as drafted, no last-minute complications. The signing ceremony conducted with the kind of professional calm that made the near catastrophe of 5 weeks earlier feel almost dreamlike. Chun shook hands with Val at the end of the table, and the 2 men had the careful, mutually respectful expression of chess opponents who had played a good game. Vanessa signed her name to the final page and felt something release in her chest that she hadn't realized was held. She texted Ryan from the conference room before she'd even stood from the table. It's done. Clean close. His reply came back in 3 minutes. Good. How do you feel? She looked at this question. Ryan didn't ask how do you feel questions. He asked what do you think questions, which were different. The shift registered. She typed, relieved. And like 5 weeks ago didn't actually happen, except that it did. It happened, he wrote. That's the part that matters. She put the phone in her pocket and stood and shook hands with the people in the room, and the deal was done, and the company was intact, and the governance structure was clean, and none of it had fallen apart the way it almost had on a Tuesday morning that now felt like it belonged to a slightly different version of her life. The party was Vanessa's CFO's idea, which she vetoed twice and then agreed to on the condition that it was small, professional, and did not involve anyone using the word celebration in a context that implied she'd accomplished something miraculous rather than avoided a serious mistake. It was a dinner. 12 people. A private room at a restaurant she'd eaten at once before and remembered as having excellent acoustics, which was not a normal criterion for celebrating a successful close, but which Vanessa had discovered mattered enormously when you needed to have real conversations during a meal. She invited Ryan. She did this by text, on a Thursday evening, matter-of-factly. "There's a dinner on Saturday. The team's marking the close. I'd like you to come." His reply took longer than usual. 35 minutes, which meant he'd been busy or was thinking about it more than he normally thought about things. Is this a work dinner or social dinner? She considered this. Both. Mostly work. Some people you'd know from the deal. "Philip's coming." "What time?" 7. "I can send the address." Another pause. Shorter this time. "Okay." She sent the address. She told herself this was professional. He was consulting for her company. The dinner was for the deal team. His inclusion was logical and unremarkable. She was mostly able to believe this. The part she wasn't able to believe, she set aside in the same way she'd been setting things aside for 5 weeks, in the category of things she was not ready to examine. He arranged for his cousin Marcus to watch Lily on Saturday evening, which required a phone call in which Marcus asked 3 questions. What time? Is there food in the house? And is this a date? And Ryan answered the first 2 directly and hung up before the third completed its sentence. He stood in his bedroom and looked at the small selection of clothes he owned that could plausibly be worn to a restaurant that was not a diner. He owned 2 dress shirts, 3 button-downs, and a blazer he'd bought for Claire's sister's wedding 4 years ago and worn twice since. He put on the blazer over a dark shirt, looked at himself in the mirror, took the blazer off, looked at himself again, and put it back on. Lily came in during this process and stood in the doorway. "You're wearing the wedding jacket," she said. "It's not a wedding jacket. It's a blazer. You wore it to Aunt Dana's wedding. And other things." She looked at him with the evaluative calm of a small person who had nothing at stake in his clothing decisions and therefore pure objectivity. "It looks good," she said. "Where are you going?" "Dinner. Work thing." "Is she going to be there?" He looked at his daughter. "A lot of people are going to be there." Lily nodded in a way that indicated this was not an answer to her question, but that she was willing to let it pass. "What time will you be home?" "Before midnight. Marcus said he'd order pizza." Marcus would order pizza at a funeral. He probably would, Lily agreed. She looked at him once more. The blazer, the shirt, the fact that he'd apparently done something intentional with his hair for the first time since the photo at her school's fall fundraiser. "You look okay, Dad." "High praise," he said. "I mean it." She turned to go back down the hall. Then, over her shoulder, without breaking stride, "Tell her hi." He didn't say anything to this. He straightened the blazer in the mirror one more time and went downstairs to wait for Marcus, who arrived 18 minutes early and immediately began looking through the refrigerator with the focused attention of someone who had been promised food in the house. The restaurant was the kind of place that had earned its reputation without advertising it. Dark wood, real linen, the low lighting that indicated either romance or expense, or usually both. Ryan arrived 4 minutes before 7, which was his standard. Early enough to not be late, not so early as to arrive before his host. Philip was already at the bar, which made immediate sense. Philip Okafor operated in a social register that meant he was comfortable in all rooms and usually arrived first to make sure of it. "Ryan Bennett," Philip said, and extended his hand with the warmth of someone who had not seen a person in years but had been thinking about them with some frequency. "You look exactly the same." 6 years. "You look the same and it's annoying." Philip clapped him on the shoulder. "Drink?" They stood at the bar and Philip ordered 2 things Ryan didn't recognize and handed him one without explanation. It was good. Ryan didn't mention that he didn't usually drink whiskey. "How's she been?" Ryan asked. Meaning Vanessa. Philip gave him a look that was interested without being pointed. "You tell me. You talk to her more than I do at this point." "Texts about documents." "Sure." Philip drank his drink. "She's different, Ryan. I've been trying to put my finger on it since that first Monday you came in. She's still herself, still runs the room, still reads everything, still makes Marco crazy by changing her schedule. But there's something slower in her, not worse, just she takes a breath now, before she makes calls. Ryan thought about this. That's not nothing. No, it's not nothing. Philip looked at him. I think you did that. I looked at a document. You know that's not what I mean. Ryan turned his glass in his hand. He did know what Philip meant. He just hadn't figured out what to do with knowing it. The rest of the group arrived over the next 15 minutes. Chun, two of the senior associates who'd worked the deal most closely, the CFO, two others whose names Ryan was given and would retain because he retained most things. There was a quality of collective relief in the room that he recognized from his years in finance, the specific social release of people who had been under sustained pressure and were only now, in a private room with good wine, allowing themselves to breathe. Vanessa arrived last, which he suspected was deliberate, not fashionably late. She was not a fashionable lateness person, the ego of it was wrong for her, but professionally last the way leaders sometimes arrived to rooms they'd organized so that everyone was already present and the entry didn't require an adjustment. She saw him at the bar and walked over. She was wearing something that was not a blazer, softer than her office clothes, dark blue, the kind of thing that cost enough to look effortless and required its own budget line. Her hair was down, which he realized he hadn't seen before. It changed the quality of her face somehow. Not better or worse. Different. More, he didn't have the right word, more present. You came, she said. I said I would. I know. I'm still glad. She looked at Philip. Philip. You're late, Philip said. I'm exactly on time. For you, you're late. She almost smiled. She gestured toward the table. Let's sit. The dinner had the quality of a good meal among people who had been through something together. The conversation moved freely between the professional and the personal in the way it does when the work has been serious enough that there's no longer any pretense of distance between the two. Chun told a story about Vale's early career that was either true or well-researched. Philip held the table's attention for 20 minutes, describing an acquisition he'd worked on before joining Sterling Integrated that had collapsed in such a specific and improbable way that two of the associates laughed loud enough to draw a look from the adjacent dining room. Ryan sat in the middle of the table and talked when he had something to say, and didn't when he didn't, which was a ratio that worked better in this group than he'd expected. Finance people, in his experience, defaulted to filling silence competitively, talking to assert presence. These people, Vanessa's people, had apparently been trained differently or self-selected differently, or had simply spent enough time with a leader who listened that they'd absorbed something. He ended up talking for 15 minutes with the CFO, a compact, thoughtful man named Gerald Takahashi, who had opinions about infrastructure debt that were more interesting than Ryan had expected, and who asked questions that made clear he'd looked into the Delmar Energy case before dinner. You knew the secondary filing structure from memory, Takahashi said, from 2018. I worked adjacent to that deal. Hartwell Cross? Affiliated firm, different seat. Takahashi looked at him. Why'd you leave? Ryan drank his water. Personal reasons. The good kind or the bad kind? There's a good kind. Takahashi considered this. I left a firm in 2015, left on purpose. Felt like the right call for about 6 months, and then felt like a mistake for a year. Then one day, it just felt like a fact. Something that happened, neither good nor bad. Ryan looked at him. Yeah, that's about right. They talked for a while longer. Across the table, Vanessa was deep in something with Philip and one of the associates. The three of them bent slightly toward each other in the posture of people tracking a complicated thread. She laughed once, a real one, not the professional kind, at something Philip said, and the associate looked startled, like it was something they hadn't seen before. Ryan noticed this without making a thing of it. After the main course, when the table had fragmented into smaller conversations and the wine had done its work, and the evening had loosened into something more comfortable, Vanessa moved to the empty chair beside him that someone had vacated to go find the restroom. How are you doing? She asked. Not socially, actually asking. Good. Gerald's interesting. He is. He doesn't show it at work as much as he should. She turned her wine glass on the tablecloth. Are you glad you came? Yeah. He paused. Philip told you I had doubts. Philip tells me things he thinks I should know. I don't always agree with his selections. She looked at him. Did you have doubts? Not about coming, about... He stopped, tried again. I spent a long time building a life that didn't require much overlap with this world. I'm still adjusting to the fact that I'm sitting in it again. Is that bad? No, just... I'm calibrating. She nodded. She seemed to understand what that meant without requiring a fuller explanation, which was something he'd noticed about her. She tracked at a good speed. She didn't pretend to understand things she didn't, but when she did understand, she didn't make you prove it twice. Ryan, she said. Yeah. Can I ask you something that isn't about a document? He looked at her. Okay. She was quiet for a moment, turning the glass, deciding something. When you left finance, when Claire died, was there a point where you had to choose between going back and staying out? Or was it just obvious? He was quiet long enough that another person might have thought he was deciding not to answer. He was just being accurate. It was obvious, he said. Not in a dramatic way, just, I had Lily, and Lily needed a specific kind of present, not a dad who was on calls at 8 p.m. and traveling for road shows. She needed someone who picked her up. He paused. And I needed to be the one who picked her up. I needed that. So the choice wasn't hard. Did you miss it? The work, sometimes. The rest of it? No. What was the rest of it? He considered this. The version of myself I had to be to do it. The suit. The performance. He looked at the table. I was good at the work. I was average at the performance. And after Claire, I had no patience left for average. Vanessa was quiet. I'm not sure I knew there was a difference, she said, between the work and the performance of the work. You do now. She looked at him. The thing about the breath, he said, before you make calls. Philip mentioned it. Something moved through her expression. The combination of being seen accurately and not entirely knowing how to respond to it. It's a work in progress, she said. Most things are. Philip appeared at the edge of the table with the expression of someone who had developed impeccable timing. We're ordering dessert. Ryan, do you want coffee? Yeah. Vanessa? She was still looking at Ryan for a moment, then she turned to Philip. Yes. Whatever they recommend. Philip withdrew. She turned back to the table and straightened slightly in her chair, which was the micro-adjustment she made when she was returning herself to a more formal register. He'd noticed she did this. The self-correction, the invisible button fastening, the return to the version of herself she'd spent years constructing. He didn't say anything about it. The dessert came. The coffee came. The evening wound down in the way good evenings do. Gradually, no one wanting to be the one who ended it, the goodbyes extended and warm. Ryan said goodnight to Philip at the door, and to Takahashi and to Chun, who thanked him with a directness and brevity that was pure Chun and therefore more meaningful than most people's speeches. Vanessa walked out with him. The street was cool. October now, the temperature having made its position known over the past week with the kind of conviction that meant summer was finished and not coming back. He'd parked 2 blocks away. She had a car waiting, the black sedan with the quiet engine. They stood on the sidewalk outside the restaurant. Thank you for coming, she said. Thanks for inviting me. A pause. Not awkward, just present. Both of them standing in it without filling it immediately. Lily's okay tonight? She asked. Marcus is with her. She's fine. What does she do on Saturday nights? Watches a movie, usually, eats pizza, goes to bed around 9 and reads until 10 and pretends she went to bed at 9. Something in Vanessa's expression did the thing again, the architecture of something warm. She sounds like a good kid, she said. She's the best person I know. He said it without any performance in it, which made it more true. Vanessa looked at him for a moment. I'd like to meet her, properly, I mean, not... I know she was in the truck, that doesn't count. He looked back at her. Why? He asked. Not defensively, just the same genuine question reflex he applied to most things. She seemed to think about it honestly. Because she's important to you, and I think I'd like to understand the things that are important to you. He held this for a moment. I'll think about it, he said. She nodded. She didn't push. She was getting better at not pushing. Good night, Ryan, she said. Good night. She got in the car. It pulled away from the curb without drama. He watched it go for a moment, then walked the 2 blocks to his truck in the cool October dark, his breath visible in the air for the first time this season. He thought about it for a week, not anxiously. He wasn't an anxious thinker, more the way he thought about mechanical problems, turning the thing over, examining it from different angles, waiting to see which view was most accurate. The question was not whether Lily would meet Vanessa. Lily met people all the time. Marcus, Mrs. Okafor, the regulars at the repair shop who sometimes came by the house, Philip when he'd called, and Lily had answered by accident and held a 3-minute conversation with him without identifying herself until the end. Lily was fine with meeting people. The question was what it meant for Lily to meet this particular person, in the way Vanessa had meant when she'd asked, the properly of it. That word had been precise, and Vanessa was not imprecise. He knew what it meant. He was running 4 to 6 hours behind, emotionally. He'd known it since somewhere around the first Monday morning in the office, when he'd watched her slide a document across the desk and realized his pulse had done something slightly irregular, which he'd attributed to the coffee, and then stopped attributing to the coffee approximately 3 days later. He had not been in any kind of emotional territory like this since Claire. He had not, if he was being exact about it, expected to be. Not because he'd decided against it, but because the machinery had been quiet for so long that he'd stopped accounting for it in his model of how the future worked. The machinery apparently had not stopped. It had just been waiting for a problem interesting enough to engage with. He was aware of the complications. She was 30 years old and ran a company and moved through the world at a speed and altitude that was genuinely different from his. He was 32 and fixed equipment and picked up his daughter at 3:15 and had a truck with a knocking engine and a kitchen table with a water stain. These were not insurmountable differences. They were real ones. He was also aware that she was changing, not performing change, but actually doing the work of it, which was rarer than people admitted. The breath before the call. The question before the judgment. The capacity to sit across a dinner table and ask a real question and wait for a real answer without filling the space. He thought about what Philip had said. She wants to be different. That's more than most people manage. On the Thursday of that week, Lily came home from school with a painting she'd made in art class. It was a landscape set, or rather, what Lily understood a landscape to be, which involved more purple than landscapes typically contained, and a horizon line that was conceptually accurate if geometrically ambitious. She held it up for his inspection with the matter-of-fact pride of an artist who had done the work and was ready for the assessment. "What do you think?" she asked. "I think the purple is working," he said. Mrs. Kelvin wanted green. "You went with purple." Purple was right. He looked at the painting. It was genuinely good in the specific way children's art was sometimes genuinely good, not technically, but in terms of decision-making. She'd decided something and committed to it without second-guessing it into nothing. "Lily," he said. "Yeah. You remember the lady I've been working with?" She looked at him, patient, not making a thing of the fact that this was the first time he'd brought it up directly. "Yeah," she said. "She'd like to meet you, properly." He used the word deliberately, seeing if it felt right. It did. Not for any particular reason, just, she knows you're important and she'd like to know you. Lily looked at the painting in her hand, then at him. "Do you like her?" He looked at his daughter. "Yeah," he said. "I do." She considered this the same way she considered all information she was incorporating into an existing model, carefully, without hurry, checking it against what she already knew. "Okay," she said. "Okay, you'll meet her, or okay, you understand what I said?" "Both," she said. She set the painting on the table and went to get a snack. Then from the kitchen, "Is she coming here, or are we going somewhere?" He hadn't thought about this. "I don't know yet. I haven't asked her." "Ask her," Lily said, "and find out if she likes horses." "Why horses?" "Because I'll know what to talk about." He sat at the table with the purple landscape in front of him and felt something settle in his chest. Not loudly, not dramatically, just the quiet, particular shift of a thing moving from one category to another. From the things he was uncertain about to the things that were simply, now, the next step. He picked up his phone. Lily says she'll meet you, he typed. She wants to know if you like horses. Vanessa's reply came back in under 2 minutes. I don't know much about horses. Should I learn before we meet, or is ignorance acceptable? He smiled, not performed, not for anyone, just the involuntary physical response of a genuine thing. Ignorance is fine, he typed. She'll teach you. She has opinions about it. I have no doubt, Vanessa replied. Then, after a pause, Ryan, thank you. For what? For trusting me with this. I know what it means. He looked at this for a moment. Then he typed, Saturday morning. There's a park by her school. They have a pony ride thing on weekends. It's not glamorous. Saturday morning is perfect, she wrote. I'll be there. He set the phone down. Lily came back from the kitchen with an apple and looked at him with the evaluative calm she brought to all situations. Well, she said. Saturday morning, he said. The park. She bit her apple, nodded once, like she'd known this was how it would go. Does she know about the pony ride? I told her it wasn't glamorous. Good. People should know things in advance. She sat down across from him and looked at the painting. I'm going to need to research what to say if she doesn't know about horses. You said you'd teach her. Yeah, but I need to think about where to start. She frowned thoughtfully at the purple horizon. There's a lot. He looked at his daughter, this small, serious, entirely original person who had navigated the last 3 years with a patience and resilience that still sometimes stopped him cold when he thought about it directly. Lily, he said. Yeah. You're going to be okay with this. She looked at him, her mother's eyes, her own specific calm. I know, Dad. I know it's different. Any of this being different is, Dad. She said it with the gentle, slight exasperation of someone who had more patience for other people's emotions than they had for unnecessary preamble. I know. It's okay. She's getting there. She used his phrase, delivered it back to him with complete sincerity. He looked at her. Yeah, he said. She is. Lily picked up the painting and studied it one more time. I'm going to put this on the fridge. Yeah, he said. You should. She went to the kitchen. He heard the distinctive sound of the magnet arrangement being reorganized to accommodate something new. The small domestic physics of a household-making room. Outside, the October afternoon was cooling toward evening, the light going golden-edged in the way it did this time of year, lower, more angled, making ordinary things look briefly like they belonged in a painting. The street was quiet. A few leaves moved. Ryan sat at the table in the quiet house and didn't think about anything in particular for a few minutes, just sat in the specific moment of it. The painting on the fridge, the phone on the table, the plans for Saturday, the truck in the driveway with its working engine and its new scratch, and its long history of going where it needed to go. Some things ended up being exactly what they were. That was, he thought, enough. Saturday morning arrived the way October mornings did in this city, quietly, with a low gray sky that might become something better by afternoon and might not, offering no guarantees either way. Ryan was up at 6:40, which was his standard regardless of the day. He made coffee, stood at the kitchen window for a while looking at the backyard where the last of the season's leaves were doing their slow, patient work of letting go, and thought about nothing in particular. This was a skill he'd developed not through any deliberate practice, but through years of mornings that required him to be functional before he was ready, and which had eventually trained him to exist in the early quiet without filling it. Lily came downstairs at 7:15 with her hair on one side only combed, wearing her barn jacket, a quilted green thing she'd acquired somewhere in the process of becoming deeply interested in horses, and which she wore to any activity that might conceivably involve horses, including activities that definitely did not, and carrying a small notebook. He looked at the notebook. What's that for? I'm going to explain horses to her. She sat at the table and opened it. I made notes. He looked at his coffee. You made notes. There's a lot of information. I don't want to forget the important parts. She studied the notebook with the focused expression she gave to prepared materials. Do you think she'll want to ride? The ponies at the park aren't really riding. They walk in a circle. I know. She said this with the patience of someone who was fully aware the ponies walked in a circle and had made peace with the limitation. But do you think she'll want to? I don't know. We can ask her. Lily nodded and wrote something in the notebook. He did not ask what. He made her oatmeal, which she ate while reviewing her notes, and he stood at the counter and drank his coffee and thought about the fact that his 7-year-old daughter had prepared a briefing document for a meeting with a billionaire CEO, and that this was, somehow, entirely consistent with everything he knew about both of them. At 8:40, he said, "We should get ready to go." Lily looked up. "I am ready. You have oatmeal on the jacket." She looked down. She found the oatmeal. She addressed it with a paper towel with the brisk efficiency of someone for whom this was a known variable. "Okay," she said. "Now I'm ready." Vanessa had been awake since 5:30. She would not have admitted this to anyone because the reason for it was the kind of thing she kept in the category of information she processed internally and released only when it had been reduced to something manageable. The reason was nerves, which was a thing she experienced rarely and handled badly, not by falling apart, but by becoming very precise. She'd spent 90 minutes reviewing documents she didn't need to review, organized her desk twice, and stood in front of her closet for longer than she'd stood in front of a closet since she was 24 and interviewing for her first serious job. She called her sister at 7:15. Her sister, whose name was Dana, was 2 years older and had the quality of someone who had watched Vanessa operate for 3 decades and no longer expressed surprise at any of it. "I'm meeting a 7-year-old this morning," Vanessa said, "and I don't know what I am." "Nervous," Dana said, "not a question." "I don't get nervous." "You get nervous when things matter. You just call it being precise." Vanessa was quiet. "What's she like?" Dana asked. "I don't know. I've never met her. Her father says she has opinions about horses." "Okay." A pause. "Vanessa, it's a 7-year-old. You're not being evaluated." "I know that." "You don't know that. You know it intellectually. You don't know it in the place that's making you organize your desk at 5 in the morning." "I wasn't—" She stopped. "How did you know about the desk?" "Because I know you." Dana's voice had the warm exasperation of genuine familiarity. "Go. Be yourself, not the office self, the one that exists when nobody's watching you be impressive." "What if she doesn't like me?" "Then you'll figure out why and adjust." A pause. "That's what you do. It's actually one of your better qualities, when you let it be." Vanessa stood at her window, phone against her ear, looking at the city in the early gray morning. "You trust me with this," she said. It was the thing at the center of it, the thing she kept returning to. "He didn't have to. I didn't earn it exactly. He just decided." "Maybe he decided you were getting there," Dana said. Vanessa recognized the phrase. She'd used it, or a version of it, in a text exchange she'd described to Dana 2 weeks ago. Her sister had the irritating habit of retaining everything and deploying it at the exact moment it was most relevant. "Yeah," Vanessa said. "Go meet the kid," Dana said. "Wear something that doesn't look like you're going to a board meeting." "I wasn't going to wear—" "The gray blazer is already out, isn't it?" Pause. "I'll call you later," Vanessa said, and hung up. She put on dark jeans, a soft sweater the color of slate, and her most ordinary coat, the one she'd bought 2 winters ago for a weekend trip, and never worn to work because it didn't project the right register. She looked at herself in the mirror. She looked like a person. Not a CEO, just a person. She left at 8:30. She arrived at the park 11 minutes early and sat on a bench near the pony ring and watched the morning set itself up around her. A couple walked a dog on the far path. 2 kids chased each other around a jungle gym with the chaotic, joyful violence of children who had not yet been told to slow down. The pony ring was not yet open. A young park employee was arranging things on the other side of the fence, moving with the specific unhurried energy of someone who knew they had time. She sat with her hands in her coat pockets and breathed the cool air and did not look at her phone. This was, she realized, something Ryan had done to her. She was doing it now without thinking. Sitting in a thing instead of managing it. Being in the actual moment of the park bench, the gray sky, the dog across the path, the faint smell of autumn leaves and horse. Not planning the next thing. Just here. She hadn't done this in years, maybe longer. She heard the truck before she saw it. The knock of the engine was distinctive. She'd heard it pulling away from her curb the night of the dinner, and before that in her peripheral awareness on the first Monday morning when she'd looked out the window of her office and watched it pull into the parking structure. And she recognized it now the way you recognized voices. The truck pulled into the small lot adjacent to the park, and she watched Ryan get out first, and then watched the passenger door open and a small person in a green quilted jacket emerge carrying a notebook. She stood up from the bench. Lily saw her first. She had a description to work from. Dark hair, usually pulled back, but maybe different on weekends. And she identified Vanessa from approximately 40 feet away with the quiet confidence of someone who had been paying attention to more than she let on. "That's her," Lily said. Ryan looked. "Yeah. She's wearing regular clothes. What did you expect?" Lily considered this. "I don't know, something fancier." She looked down at her own jacket. "Should I have dressed fancier?" "You look fine." "I have oatmeal." "You got the oatmeal." "Oh, right." She squared her notebook under her arm and walked with him toward the bench where Vanessa was now standing and doing something Ryan recognized after a moment as the slight involuntary adjustment of someone who was nervous and was not showing it particularly well. He noticed this and found it unexpectedly reassuring. "Hi," he said. "Hi." She looked at him, then down at Lily. The professional register had left her voice entirely. What replaced it was simpler, genuine, slightly careful, the voice of someone who was trying to get this right. "You must be Lily." Lily looked at her. The evaluative assessment was not rude. It was just direct, the honest appraisal of a child who had not yet learned to disguise her conclusions. "Hi," Lily said. "Do you like horses?" "I don't know much about horses," Vanessa said. "Your dad told me you might know more than I do." "I do," Lily said. This was stated as fact, not boasting. "I made notes." She held up the notebook. Vanessa looked at the notebook, then at Lily, and something moved through her expression that was partly recognition and partly something else. Something that looked like being caught off guard in a way she didn't mind. "Can I see?" she asked. Lily opened the notebook and held it out. Vanessa crouched down slightly to read it. Genuinely, not performing interest, actually reading. And Ryan watched Lily watch her do this and saw his daughter's assessment shift from evaluative to something warmer in real time. "You wrote about their memory," Vanessa said. "Horses remember things for a long time," Lily said. "Like if someone was mean to them once, they remember. But if someone was kind, they remember that too." Vanessa looked at the page for a moment. Then she looked at Lily. "That's good to know," she said, and her voice had something in it that Ryan understood but didn't try to name. Lily nodded. "The ponies here are small. The ring is kind of boring, but they're real horses, basically." "Should we go look?" "Yeah," Lily said. She started walking toward the ring with the natural authority of someone who knew where they were going, her notebook under her arm. Vanessa straightened up and fell into step beside her, and Ryan walked on Lily's other side, and the three of them moved across the grass in the cool October morning like this was a thing they had done before. So, the pony ring opened at 9. There were 3 ponies, one gray, one bay, one with a brown and white pattern that Lily informed them was called a pinto, with the patient, thorough tone of a person who had been waiting for the opportunity to use this information. The young park employee managed the operation with the resigned competence of someone who had led hundreds of small humans in circles and had made his peace with this being the work. Lily rode first. She sat straight-backed in the small saddle with a seriousness that was entirely genuine. She was not performing for anyone. She was just being exactly who she was around horses, which was someone who took them seriously. She held the reins with both hands. She looked at the path ahead. She did not look at Ryan or Vanessa while she rode, which was how Ryan knew she was fully in it. He and Vanessa stood at the fence. "She's good," Vanessa said. "She's been 3 times. She's practiced the posture at home." Vanessa looked at him. "Practiced how?" Chair and a broomstick, last Tuesday. She was very committed to it. Vanessa looked back at the ring where Lily was completing her second circuit with the composed dedication of a person who intended to make every moment of the paid time count. She's exactly like you, Vanessa said. People keep saying that. It's true. The way she prepares, the notebook. She paused. The way she just decides to take something seriously and then takes it seriously without making a production of it. He looked at Lily going around the ring, small and focused and entirely herself. Her mother was like that too, he said. He said it the way he said most true things, flatly, without warning, without dramatic adjustment of tone. She used to say there was a difference between caring about something and performing caring about something, that most people did the second and thought it was the first. Vanessa was quiet for a moment. What was she like, Claire? He'd mentioned her name once, briefly, and hadn't gone back to it. Vanessa had not pushed. She was asking now, directly, which felt different from pushing. It felt like deciding that the question was worth the risk of asking. Steady, he said. Funny, in a quiet way. She had opinions about very specific things. The right way to fold a map, whether hot coffee should ever be put in a glass, how far in advance you were allowed to talk about a movie you wanted to see. He paused. She was an emergency room nurse. She saw people on their worst days for 12 years and she never got hard about it. I don't know how she did that. Another pause. Lily has her eyes. I know, Vanessa said softly. I saw it when she was looking at the notebook. They stood at the fence in the October morning, and Lily went around the ring, and the pony's breath made small clouds in the cold air, and Ryan stood in the middle of all of it and felt, for the first time in a long time, like the full geometry of his life was visible to him at once, the past and the present and whatever came next, not as separate compartments, but as one continuous thing that included loss and included work and included a 7-year-old on a pony and included this woman standing beside him who was trying, genuinely, to be different from who she'd been. He had not expected any of this. He thought about what Claire used to say, that the things that changed you didn't announce themselves, that you looked back later and saw the stone and the water and the ripples going out. A Tuesday morning, a tow truck, a ghost variable buried on page 308. Ripples. Lily came off the pony with the slightly deflated satisfaction of someone whose allotted time had expired before their interest had. That was good, she said, with the measured tone of a critic giving credit where it was due without overselling. You looked like you knew what you were doing, Vanessa told her. Lily seemed to accept this as an accurate rather than flattering statement. Do you want to ride? Vanessa looked at the ponies. She looked at the ring. She looked at Lily, who was watching her with the patient attention of someone who had extended an invitation and was prepared for either answer. Yes, Vanessa said. Lily looked surprised. Not disappointed, but genuinely surprised, as if this had been the less expected outcome. Okay, she said. I'll tell you what to do. What followed was 5 minutes that Ryan would think about for a long time afterward. Vanessa Sterling, who ran a company with operations across 9 countries and had negotiated multi-billion-dollar transactions across a conference table from people who were very good at being intimidating. Vanessa Sterling stood at the mounting block of a small pony ride in a city park and accepted instruction from a 7-year-old in a green quilted jacket, with complete seriousness and no performance of humility. Lily told her how to hold the reins. Vanessa held them that way. Lily told her to sit straight and look forward, not down. Vanessa sat straight and looked forward. When Vanessa's posture drifted after the first circuit, Lily said, "You're looking down," and Vanessa corrected without visible ego. Ryan stood at the fence and watched this and felt something unlock in his chest that he hadn't known was locked. When she came off the pony, Vanessa's coat had a faint mark on the sleeve from the fence rail, and her hair had come partly loose from where she'd pushed it back, and she looked in the precise way that Dana had meant when she'd said the one that exists when nobody's watching you be impressive. She looked like herself. "How did I do?" she asked Lily. "Good," Lily said. For a first time, really good. She considered this. "You corrected fast when I told you. That's the important part." "Taking correction," Vanessa said. "Yeah." Some people don't like it. Lily said this with the calm authority of someone reporting an observable fact. Horses can tell. Vanessa looked at her. What do horses do when they don't trust someone? They don't go where you want them to go. Or they go, but they're not really with you. Lily thought about this. There's a difference. Vanessa was quiet for a moment. Yeah, she said. There is. Dessa. They walked to a coffee cart at the edge of the park, after, Lily having negotiated the addition of a hot chocolate to the excursion with the efficient minimalism of someone who had identified the moment of maximum goodwill and deployed her request accordingly. They sat at a small table under a bare-limbed tree. Lily drank her hot chocolate and talked about a horse documentary she'd recently watched with the comprehensive, tangent-prone enthusiasm she reserved for topics she'd been waiting to discuss with someone new. Vanessa listened with the real listening. The kind that followed the tangents, that asked questions that were actually about what Lily had said rather than questions designed to redirect towards something easier. Ryan drank his coffee and watched the two of them talk, and said less than he usually did, which was not much. At one point, Lily said, "My dad says you almost made a really bad mistake with some papers." Ryan looked at his daughter, Lily. "He didn't tell me the details," Lily said, addressing this clarification to Vanessa. "Just that there was a bad mistake, and he found it." Vanessa looked at Ryan for a moment. Something in her expression, the willingness to be accountable, the things she'd been working on. "He did find it," she said. "It was a big mistake. I had a lot of smart people working for me, and nobody found it except him." "Why?" Lily asked. "Because they were looking at the parts I told them to look at." She paused. "He looked at the parts nobody thought to check." Lily seemed to find this satisfying in a structural sense. That's what he does with the equipment too. He doesn't fix the thing everyone says is broken. He figures out why it's broken. Vanessa looked at Ryan. "That's a good way to put it." "She's right," he said. "I know she's right. She just explained you better than you've explained yourself in 6 weeks." Lily looked briefly pleased by this, in the contained way she allowed herself to be pleased by accurate things. "Dad says you're getting there," Lily said to Vanessa. Ryan closed his eyes for a fraction of a second. Vanessa looked at Lily. Not defensive, not embarrassed, just present with it. "He says that?" "Every time I ask about you," Lily said. "Getting there. Every time. So I figured you must be getting there for a long time." "I've been working on some things," Vanessa said. "That's okay," Lily said. She picked up her hot chocolate. "Most things take a long time. Mrs. Okafor says the things that matter usually do." Vanessa looked at Ryan. He looked back at her. He didn't say anything. There was nothing to add. Oh, they stayed at the park longer than any of them had planned. This was Lily's doing, in the specific way that children extended outings they were enjoying, not by asking to stay, but by generating a continuous sequence of small activities that made leaving feel like an interruption. After the coffee cart, she identified a path she wanted to walk. After the path, there was a pond with ducks that had opinions about proximity. After the ducks, there was a particular tree she claimed had interesting bark, which she explained in some detail. Vanessa went along with all of it. Not because she was performing patience, Ryan could see the difference by now, the real version of her attention and the managed version. This was real. She was interested in what Lily was interested in, or she was interested in Lily being interested in it, which amounted to the same thing in practice. At one point, while Lily was crouched at the edge of the pond conducting what appeared to be a negotiation with a particularly assertive duck, Vanessa said quietly to Ryan, "Thank you for this." "You already said that." "I know." She looked at Lily. "I mean it differently now than I did in the text message." He looked at the pond, at his daughter, who was now narrating something to the duck in a low, serious voice. "How do you mean it now?" "I think—" She stopped, tried again. "I came here this morning thinking I needed to make a good impression, on a 7-year-old. I had a whole plan." She shook her head slightly. "And then she showed me her notebook and I forgot the plan, and it was better." He looked at her. "The plan was the problem," he said. "I know that now." "You always know it now. The work is knowing it before." She looked at him, not defensive, She'd stopped being defensive somewhere around week 2 of the consulting arrangement, at least with him. Is that something you figured out? No, he said. I'm working on it too. She seemed to find this genuinely comforting, which made sense. It was comforting. The idea that working on something was the condition, not the failure. That nobody arrived, they just kept moving toward. Lily stood up from the pond and turned around and walked back to them with the directness she brought to all locomotion. The duck bit my finger, she said. Ryan looked at her hand. Are you okay? It didn't break the skin, it just committed. She seemed more impressed than upset. She was protecting that corner. That's her territory. Okay, Ryan said. Maybe we stay out of her territory. Obviously, Lily looked at Vanessa. Did you ever get bitten by something you shouldn't have gotten close to? Vanessa looked at this question from several angles simultaneously. Yes, she said, more than once. Did you learn from it? Eventually, Lily nodded. That's what matters. She looked at the tree with the interesting bark. I want to show you the root structure on this one. It's unusual. Vanessa looked at Ryan. He shrugged slightly. The particular shrug of a parent who had long since accepted that the schedule was Lily's. Vanessa followed Lily to the tree. They ate lunch at a diner 3 blocks from the park. Ryan's suggestion, because he knew the diner and its qualities, which were functional and unpretentious and included excellent pancakes that were not served past 11 a.m. on a technicality that the owner, a man named Bo, enforced without consistency. Bo made an exception when Ryan asked, because Bo had known Ryan for 2 years and operated on the logic that a regular who'd never asked for anything special had credit accumulated. Lily ate pancakes with a focus that suggested she'd been building toward this since the hot chocolate. Vanessa ordered eggs and ate them without looking at her phone once, which Ryan clocked and which he suspected she was aware of clocking. This place is good, Vanessa said, looking around at the diner. The vinyl booze, the laminate counter, the handwritten specials board that Bo updated in the same cramped handwriting every morning. It's reliable, Ryan said. That's better than good most of the time. Reliable is underrated, she agreed. Bo makes the best pancakes, Lily said without looking up from hers. Dad brings me here after good report cards. How often is that? Vanessa asked. Lily looked up, considered whether this was a trick question, determined it wasn't. Every time, she said. Every time, Ryan confirmed. Vanessa looked at him. You were going to be modest about it. I wasn't going to say anything about it. Same thing. He drank his coffee. Lily watched this exchange with the still observational quality of someone watching something they'd been wondering about and were now getting data on. After a while, she said to no one in particular, This is nice. Ryan looked at her. Yeah? Yeah. She cut a piece of pancake, all of it, today. She was matter-of-fact about it, not sentimental, not performing an observation, just reporting accurately. I like it. Ryan looked at his daughter, then at Vanessa, who was looking at Lily with an expression that was unguarded in a way he hadn't seen before, something close to tenderness, which sat differently on her face than the other expressions, newer, like a room that had just been opened after being closed for a long time. Me too, Vanessa said. They said goodbye in the diner parking lot at 1:30. The sky had done what October skies sometimes did, resolved the gray into something better, a pale, clean blue with the kind of light that made everything look like it had good bone structure. The temperature had come up enough that it was just cool without being cold, and the afternoon had the quality of unexpected reprieve that good weather sometimes carried. Lily had her notebook under her arm and a to-go box with the remaining pancakes, which Bo had wrapped without being asked, and she stood beside the truck with the satisfied composure of someone whose day had gone as well as the preliminary research had suggested it might. Vanessa crouched down to her level. Not the patronizing crouch of an adult managing a child. The genuine one, eye to eye, the same way she'd read the notebook. I had a really good time today, she said. Thank you for teaching me about horses. Lily looked at her seriously. You're a fast learner. I try to be. A pause. Can I ask you something? Yeah. The thing you said about horses, that they can tell the difference between going with someone and just going. She held Lily's gaze. Do you think people can tell too? Lily thought about this with the full, unperformative consideration she gave to serious questions. Yeah, she said. I think so. It takes longer with people, though. Horses are faster. Why do you think that is? Because people can pretend better, Lily said, but it doesn't last as long as they think it does. Vanessa looked at her for a moment. Then she nodded once, the way Ryan nodded when something was accurate and didn't need more words than that. She stood up. She looked at Ryan. Same time Monday? She asked. Yeah, he said. She started to turn toward her car. Then she stopped. She turned back. Ryan. Yeah. I'm going to keep trying. She said it plainly, without the careful management she usually brought to statements about herself. Not to be impressive, just to be worth the trust. She paused. I wanted you to know that. Out loud. He looked at her for a moment. The parking lot, the blue sky, Lily beside him with her notebook and her pancakes and her particular calm. I know, he said. That's why it's working. She held his gaze for a beat. Then she nodded and got in her car and drove away. Ryan and Lily drove home in the truck, the engine knocking its single comfortable knock in the cool afternoon air. Lily had the to-go box in her lap and was looking out the window at the city going past. She was quiet in the easy way. She was quiet when she was thinking about something and had not yet decided whether to say it. He let her think. 3 blocks from home, she said, she tries really hard. Yeah, he said, she does. You can tell. She looked at the window. It's like when someone's new at something and they know they're new at it and they don't pretend. A pause. Some people pretend they're not new even when they are. She doesn't do that anymore. She used to, he said. I know, you told me. She turned from the window. But she doesn't now, so. The full weight of Lily's ethical system contained in one syllable. Who you are now and what you're doing about it, those are the numbers. The past is context, not verdict. He pulled into the driveway, turned off the engine. The knock settled into silence. Dad, Lily said. Yeah. She had her hand on the door handle. She was looking at the front of the house, the porch, the window where the kitchen light was visible, the particular ordinary geography of the only home she'd known. It's okay, she said. He looked at her. She turned and looked back at him. Her mother's eyes, her own specific knowledge, somehow, of things she shouldn't yet be old enough to understand. All of it, she said. It's okay. He held her gaze for a moment, then he nodded. Yeah, he said. It is. The consulting arrangement did not stay a trial. 3 months came and went, and neither of them raised the word reassess, because reassessing implied a doubt that had stopped being accurate somewhere around week 6, when Ryan had sat in a chair across from Vanessa's desk for a Tuesday afternoon session, and they'd spent 40 minutes on a document and 90 minutes on everything else, and neither of them had commented on the ratio. Fortuna's deal closed clean. The restructured acquisition integrated over the following quarter without incident. Chun sent Ryan a bottle of whiskey for his birthday, which Philip had mentioned in passing. Ryan didn't drink much whiskey, but appreciated the gesture, which he recognized as Chun's particular way of saying thank you without making it complicated. Philip had lunch with both of them in November at the diner and sat across the table with the expression of a man who had watched 2 separate storylines converge and was satisfied with the narrative but too self-contained to say so. He asked Ryan about the repair work. He asked Vanessa about the Q4 infrastructure review. He ate a turkey sandwich and talked with Lily, who had come because it was a Saturday, about the horse documentary, which he had not seen but about which he was willing to be educated. She's remarkable, he told Ryan afterward, when Lily had gone back inside to get her jacket. Lily. I know, Ryan said. She's going to run something someday. Some large and important something. Let her be 7 for a while. Obviously. Philip looked at him. You look different, Ryan. From November? From 6 years ago. He paused. From before, when I knew you. You were good then. You were very good. But you were... He searched for the word. contained, like someone keeping something under pressure. Ryan thought about this. I probably was. You're not anymore. Philip said it simply. Whatever happened, the truck, the contract, all of it, you're not anymore. Ryan looked at the street, at the ordinary afternoon, at nothing in particular. She asked me once, he said, whether I missed finance, the work of it. What did you tell her? That I missed the interesting problems. He paused. I don't miss them anymore. Philip understood what this meant. He was Philip Okafor. He understood things without requiring them to be spelled out, which was why he was still employed by people who didn't explain themselves easily. Good, he said. Things did not resolve in the way of movies or stories that were building toward something. There was no single moment, no declarative conversation under rain or on a rooftop or in a hallway where everything clarified. What there was instead was the slow accumulation of ordinary things that became, over time, more ordinary. And then, at some point that neither of them could identify precisely after the fact, became theirs. A Saturday morning routine at the park that became less occasional and more expected. Lily's notes on horses, which expanded over the months into a loose-leaf system that she'd begun organizing by category. A standing Monday morning at the office that had stopped being formally consultative and started being simply work. The work of two people who thought well together and had stopped pretending the thinking happened only in professional registers. Vanessa became, gradually, the kind of person who answered questions before making decisions. Not always. She backslid. There were weeks when the pressure of the company pulled her back toward the fast, elevated judgment of her former self. When she moved too quickly, assumed too confidently, made the call from the 42nd floor without going down to check. When this happened, she knew it now. That was the difference. She knew it, and she came back. Ryan watched this without commentary. It wasn't his job to narrate it. He just stayed consistent, showed up on Mondays, answered the calls, read the documents, said what he thought when she asked, and sometimes when she didn't. He was still the person who finished the paragraph even after Lily fell asleep. He was still the person who drove the old truck, which had been serviced and maintained and had developed 3 new quirks he understood precisely and had decided to accept as character. He was also, he realized slowly, the person who looked forward to Mondays with a specificity that had nothing to do with documents. The moment he finally acknowledged this, to himself, not to anyone else, was a Tuesday in December, when he was standing at his kitchen window watching the first real snow of the season come down in the particular unhurried way of snow that intended to stay, and his phone buzzed with a text from Vanessa that said, "Snow. I've been watching it for 20 minutes. I don't think I've watched snow fall in years." He looked at this. He typed back, "What made you stop?" A pause. Then, "You? Probably." Generalized you effect. He stood at the window with the phone in his hand and looked at the snow. He typed, "That's a terrible thing to admit." "I know. I'm practicing saying true things out loud." "How's that going?" "Terrifying. Efficient." He almost laughed. Not almost. He laughed quietly, at the window, in the empty kitchen, at 8:30 on a Tuesday morning with the snow coming down. "Ryan," she typed. "Yeah." A pause longer than her usual ones. "I want to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly and not politely." "Okay. Do you think this is—" Another pause. "Do you think we're doing this?" He looked at the snow. He thought about a Tuesday morning 5 months ago. A tow truck. An old truck that had its own ideas about the morning. A woman 42 floors up who had not asked a single question before making a call that cost him 4 hours and a scratched bumper, and who had spent every day since then trying to be the kind of person who asked. He thought about Lily on the fence at the park, correcting Vanessa's posture with the matter-of-fact authority of someone who trusted that correction was welcome. About Philip's expression at the diner, satisfied and unsurprised. About Dana calling him, eventually, because Vanessa had apparently told her enough that Dana had decided to call and tell him, in direct and unambiguous terms, that her sister was happy in a way she hadn't been in a long time, and that she expected him to take that seriously. He thought about what it meant to be 4 to 6 hours behind, emotionally, about how sometimes that was just what it cost to arrive at a thing that was actually true rather than a thing that was convenient. He typed, "Yeah, I think we're doing this." The reply came back in under 10 seconds. "Okay," she wrote. "Good. Then, I'll see you Monday. See you Monday." He put the phone in his pocket. He stood at the window and watched the snow for another few minutes. It was coming down steadily now, covering the backyard in that specific, patient way. Not dramatic, not urgent, just consistent. The way snow did it. The way most things that lasted did it. He heard Lily on the stairs. She came into the kitchen in her pajamas, saw the snow, and stopped in the doorway with the expression she reserved for things that were genuinely good. Not effusive, not performed, just open, just real. "Snow," she said. "Yeah." She came and stood beside him at the window. They stood there together for a while, the two of them, in the kitchen with the water-stained table and the purple landscape on the fridge and the to-go boxes in the recycling that had come from the diner, watching the snow make the world briefly equal and clean and covered in something that wasn't permanent but was, for now, enough. "Dad?" Lily said. "Yeah." "Are you happy?" He looked at the snow. He looked at his daughter. He thought about everything it had taken to arrive at a Tuesday morning in December in a kitchen that was imperfect and familiar and entirely his, with a person who had her mother's eyes and her own uncompromising honesty, and a notebook full of horse facts and the particular clear-eyed wisdom of someone who had learned early that most things take a long time and that the things that mattered usually did. "Yeah," he said. "I am." She nodded once, the way she nodded at accurate things. Then she went to the refrigerator because she was 7 years old and snow was good, but breakfast was also a priority. And these two things could exist simultaneously without conflict. He stayed at the window a moment longer. Outside, the snow came down. The old truck sat in the driveway, patient and unremarkable and responsible, in its own specific way, for everything. There is a version of this story where the lesson is about wealth, about how money doesn't determine worth. How a man in worn jeans can see what men in expensive suits cannot. How the trappings of success are not the same as the substance of it. That version is not wrong, but it is incomplete. The fuller version is about what happens when two people, both of them flawed in their particular ways, one too closed, one too quick to judge, end up in each other's lives through a series of events that no one planned and no one would have designed, and decide, separately and then together, to do the harder thing. The harder thing is not impressive. It does not look like much from the outside. It looks like a man reading a document at a kitchen table. It looks like a woman sitting alone in a conference room with cold coffee. It looks like a 7-year-old making notes about horses, preparing to meet a stranger her father had decided to trust. It looks like someone taking a breath before making a call. It looks like an old truck in a driveway, waiting. Most of the things that matter look like almost nothing until you know what you're looking at. Ryan Bennett spent years building a life that didn't ask too much of him, not because he was afraid of demanding things, but because he had already given everything to the most demanding thing, and what he had left, he needed to give to his daughter. That was not limitation. That was love in its most exact and responsible form. Vanessa Sterling spent years building a life that looked exactly like the one she'd decided to have, and had not noticed, until a Tuesday morning with a parked truck and a contract with a ghost variable, that she had confused the building of a life with the living of one. Neither of them fixed the other. That is not how this works. That is not how anything works, despite what stories sometimes suggest. What they did was simpler and harder. They showed up, consistently. With their actual selves, the parts that worked and the parts that didn't, the parts they were proud of and the parts they were working on. They showed up imperfect, and they stayed, and the staying was the thing. Lily knew this before either of them did. She had known it from the morning she sat on the sidewalk by a cone and watched her father's truck be loaded onto a flatbed without complaint, because she had her father's patience and her mother's clarity, and she understood, in the bone-deep way children sometimes understand things adults complicate, that how a person handles a hard moment is the most accurate information you will ever have about them. She had watched her father handle hard moments for 3 years. She watched Vanessa Sterling handle one, and then another, and then a whole sequence of them, each time taking the breath, each time asking the question, each time getting a little bit closer to the version of herself that was worth getting to. Getting there, he'd said, every time. And she had been. And she was. The snow kept falling on the city, on the park with its pony ring, on Meridian Tower with its 42 floors, on the impound lot on Crane Street, on a diner where Beau was writing the day's specials on a board in cramped handwriting. It fell on all the ordinary geography of ordinary lives, indifferent and equal, and briefly, quietly, beautiful. In a kitchen, a girl ate breakfast, and a man watched the snow. A phone sat on the counter between them, and somewhere across the city, another phone sat on a desk beside a window, and outside both windows the same snow fell, connecting them by weather, if nothing else, though by now it was something else and had been for a while. The morning was full. That was enough. That was, in fact, everything.